Chapter 452. Amidst the thrilling background music, the wind chasers began to encounter a series of bad weather conditions. Lightning, torrential rain, and hail appeared one after another, mixed with the shadows of a few tornadoes from time to time. "There's nothing special about it," Virginia exclaimed in the pointy corner manner. The next moment, the scene cut to an asphalt road that was raining heavily. A violent tornado in the distance uprooted a series of electric poles by the roadside. In the midst of the sparks and lightning and the screams of the protagonists, a family speedboat that was swept up by the tornado whistled towards the camera. The close-up of the speedboat grew bigger and bigger, until it finally protruded out of the black border of the trailer. At that moment, everyone who saw this scene had the illusion that the speedboat was about to fly out of the screen and smash into them. "Whoa!" Virginia and Joanna both screamed and leaned back. Even Eric, who was prepared for this, could not help but lean back like this. At the same time, countless families in North America who were watching the live broadcast of the Super Bowl let out sounds of surprise or admiration as they leaned back. However, the audience who saw this scene did not even have time to think about what was going on. The next scene of the tornado rushing out of the TV screen with countless debris had already firmly captured their eyeballs. In the last 40 seconds of the trailer, the visual bombardment brought about by the tight but not overflowing thrilling scenes completely attracted everyone. When the end of the trailer showed the name of the movie Tornado and the eye-catching screening date on June 5th, a large number of frightened audiences already had a strong desire to watch the movie in their hearts. The title of the movie and the date of its release froze for 2 seconds. Just when everyone thought that the trailer had ended, the TV screen suddenly darkened. As the image flickered, a farm tractor that had been thrown out by a tornado rolled out of the screen. Boom! Amidst the loud sound of glass shattering, countless shocking cracks appeared on the televisions of thousands of households. The last scene was meticulously created by the best special effects artists in the digital field to the extent that it was completely fake. Although the audience knew in their hearts that it was impossible, the first reaction in the minds of any audience who saw this scene was that their TV had been smashed. *T. How did they make this scene? It scared me. How would I know? It would be great if they could play it again. I was scared to death. I thought the TV was really smashed. This is so King cool. I must watch this movie as soon as possible. It's so cool, but it won't be released for another 4 months. Oh my god, this is going to be a long wait. I don't know when the pre-screening will be held. Maybe we can get a few tickets to see it first. As soon as the trailer finished airing, there were all kinds of discussions in the countless living rooms. Many people even lost interest in the Super Bowl. Under the influence of this ingenious trailer, the trailers of the next few movies were swept to the level of being bland. "Eric, how did you make these?" After the trailer was played, Virginia, who was leaning against Eric, asked this question for many people. The screen ratio of the TV is 4:3, but the standard screen ratio of the cinema is 16:9. When the trailer is played on the TV, 2 black lines are added to the top and bottom of the picture in order to maintain the movie lens ratio. Otherwise, the content of the picture will be distorted. The trailer just now made reasonable use of the 2 black lines. Through the computer CG modification, things like yachts and tractors can cross the black line limit and increase the depth of field of different objects in the picture to create the illusion that the objects fly out of the screen. Virginia nodded in understanding. It sounds very simple. I thought it would be more powerful. The principle of a lot of things is very simple. The plane only flies through the air during acceleration. Can you make it? Eric joked. Although many professionals could see the principle of the trailer just now at a glance, at present, except for the digital field, it was basically impossible for other special effects companies to produce the same effect in a short period of time. After all, in the whole of Hollywood, when model special effects were still the mainstream film and television special effects, no special effects company would get hundreds of millions of dollars to research and develop computer CG special effects technology. In the office building of Universal Pictures, the Super Bowl final had long been forgotten by everyone. The trailer of Tornado had been played on the projection screen in the conference room for the 5th time in a row. "Kane, can your special effects department make a similar shot?" After playing it again, Michael Eisner turned his head and asked a person in charge of Universal's special effects department. Kane Pitt hesitated for a moment before shaking his head unwillingly. Mr. Eisner, we can easily complete the special effects in the shot, but when it comes to the scene of the tornado, although we can barely do it, we definitely can't achieve the level of realism in this trailer. Michael Eisner's expression didn't change. He asked gently, "What are the specific difficulties? Briefly explain." Kane Pitt smiled bitterly and said, "Mr. Eisner, computer special effects are actually not complicated. Many of the principles have been proposed by relevant scientists decades ago. The key is the various kinds of software and hardware, as well as the research and development investment. For example, the most important work of computer CG special effects is the material rendering after the model is completed. This is related to the degree of realism of the picture. I have a friend who happens to be in the digital field. He told me that the computing power of the digital field's rendering farm used in the post-production processing can even be ranked in the top 50 supercomputers in the world. Just this alone is not something that we, who only have a few graphics workstations, can reach. If I give you enough money to upgrade the hardware facilities needed, and in addition, I can also poach some people from the digital field, then, how long do you think it will take to catch up with the technology level of the digital field? It's very difficult." This time Kane Pitt didn't hesitate. "Mr. Eisner, the scene of the barn being destroyed in the trailer, according to my experience, is not a live shot but a completely CG image. This involves complex dynamic knowledge and requires professional software tools to process. At present, it seems that the digital field has developed a full set of mature software tools. If we do it from scratch, it will take 1 to 2 years, and the possibility of catching up with the digital field is not high. After all, they have been developing new technology all this time." Michael Eisner frowned slightly. Since the amazing liquid metal robot in Terminator 2 last year, Michael Eisner was keenly aware that in the future, special effects movies would become the mainstream of Hollywood movies. Firefly's movies such as Tornado, Jurassic Park, and Collision all indicated this trend. That was why Michael Eisner paid so much attention to the trailer of Tornado tonight. But now, it seemed that even if they understood the crux of the matter, they were powerless because they were far behind the digital field in terms of time. Although the digital field did not reject the special effects projects of other film companies, everyone knew that as a special effects company controlled by Firefly, the digital field would prioritize Firefly's film projects under any circumstances. Only the free manpower and material resources would be used on other companies' films. Moreover, the digital field was likely to become an important tool for Firefly to win over or suppress other film companies. Michael Eisner's frozen expression made everyone in the conference room cautious. The silent atmosphere lasted for nearly a minute. Kane Pitt, who had just been asked, said softly, "Mr. Eisner?" Kane Pitt also knew a little about the dispute between Michael Eisner and Eric. After hearing his response, he said, "In fact, although Industrial Light and Magic's technical level in CG special effects is not as good as the digital field, they have a strong technical experience after all. I think they are the only special effects company in Hollywood that can compete with the digital field." Michael Eisner nodded slightly and thought quickly in his mind. He did not have any friendship with George Lucas, but everyone knew that George Lucas and Spielberg were good friends. Now, Spielberg still owed Universal 7 film contracts. If he could get this pair to join Worldwide, it would definitely strengthen his position in Worldwide. Although Spielberg and he had some disagreements because of their cooperation at Disney, Michael Eisner had already made up his mind to ease the conflict with Spielberg before he took office. This clause was even written into a subsidiary contract by Panasonic, who also valued Spielberg. In order to reconcile with a person, blindly pleasing them often did not work. The most important thing was to cater to their interests. In the conference room, after Michael Eisner put forward his idea, an executive quickly thought of something. Before Michael Eisner took office, Spielberg had already begun to contact Universal for the adaptation rights of a biography called Schindler's Schindler's Ark, which told the story of Schindler saving a large number of Jews in the concentration camp during World War II, was bought by Universal as early as the early 1980s. Sid Schindler had always wanted Spielberg to direct it himself, but because of various concerns, Spielberg had delayed this plan until now. However, recently Steve Ross, the CEO of Warner Brothers, who had a very close relationship with Spielberg, had become more and more ill. He could die at any time. Spielberg had always felt that Steve Ross was very much in line with his image of Schindler, so he planned to film Schindler's Ark and dedicate it to the elder. When everyone pieced together the cause and effect of the matter, Michael Eisner quickly decided to reconcile with Spielberg through this matter, and then contact George Lucas through Spielberg. Paul, organize the information about the book Schindler's Ark, and give it to me as soon as possible. I want to see it tomorrow morning. In addition, find out which restaurant Mr. Spielberg likes the most, and reserve the best seat for tomorrow night. Watching his assistant record his instructions in a memo, Michael Eisner gently rubbed his temples, then stood up and said to everyone, "Okay, that's all for today. Everyone can go back and rest. I've long felt that it's not a good idea to release Dark War prequel on June 12th. There's Tornado in front and Batman in the back." In a luxurious villa in Beverly Hills, Columbia's president, Chong Peters, said after seeing the trailer of Tornado. Compared to Michael Eisner's detailed discussion of the trailer of Tornado at the global headquarters, Peter Guber and Chong Peters in the villa were laymen. The two managed the movie completely based on their feelings. It was not an exaggeration to say that they were messing around. Back then, when Spielberg was producing The Color Purple, although Peter Guber was the producer, Spielberg, who was extremely disgusted with Peter Guber's layman command, specifically wrote a clause in the relevant contract that prohibited Peter Guber from taking a step onto the set of The Color Purple. Compared to Peter Guber, who had a university degree, Chong Peters was even more unbearable. This person was just a hairstylist for a Hollywood star. He was rude and bad-tempered, and he didn't even know how to read. The two of them could climb to the helm of one of the Big Seven. It had to be said that it was one of the wonders of Hollywood in recent years. Peter Guber gently shook the red wine in his hand and said, "The schedule has been announced. It's definitely too late to adjust the schedule now. The investment for this movie has been increased to $86 million by Tom Cruise. Including the publicity, it needs at least $150 million in North America and $300 million worldwide to ensure that all the costs are recovered. We must think of a way. We can't go on like this. What can we do? We can't go to Firefly or Warner to change the schedule of Tornado and Batman, right?" Chong Peters thought hard for a while, then suddenly slapped his thigh and said, "Hey, have you heard of the recent scandal of Woody Allen?" Peter Guber said, "Of course, it's so lively. How could I not have heard of it? What do you say we do the same to Eric Williams?" Chong Peters asked tentatively. After Woody Allen's scandal was exposed, his latest movie had basically reached the point where no one cared about it. Peter Guber's hand that was shaking the red wine paused for a moment, then he quickly shook his head. "No, for Eric Williams now, this trick is not very useful. He is now the owner of Firefly. Even if he doesn't make movies, he can still be a billionaire. But if he knows what we are doing, humph, think about Michael Eisner's end. Although this little guy is young, he is not to be trifled with." Chapter 453. Sid Sheinberg has been kicked out of the circle by Panasonic. If we don't do something, maybe it will be our turn next. John Peters' tone was full of worry and reluctance. For him and Peter Guber, who were originally second-rate producers in Hollywood, the huge Columbia Pictures was like a piece of fat roast meat. The two of them had not enjoyed enough of this delicious food. And of course, they were not willing to be kicked out so soon. Peter Guber thought for a while, and showed a smile of enlightenment. "Actually, we don't have to compete with Firefly at all. Wouldn't it be better to cooperate? Any film company in Hollywood is looking forward to cooperating with Firefly. Do you think it will be our turn?" Peter Guber shook his head and said, "No, it's not the same. We can afford the price that other film companies can't afford." John Peters immediately understood Peter Guber's meaning. Anyway, Columbia now belonged to the Japanese. No matter what price they paid, the Japanese would be the ones to lose. And if they could cooperate with Firefly, who was in the limelight in Hollywood, It would undoubtedly increase the Japanese's confidence in the two of them taking control of Colombia. The two of them would have enough time to constantly seize private benefits from Colombia. Peter, do you have Eric Williams' private contact information? Maybe we should make an appointment with him to talk now. Peter Goober nodded and said, Of course. Of course, no problem, Frank. Haha, Digital Domain has never said that we don't accept external film projects. As a company, of course, the more projects we have, the better. But I still don't know the theme of your movie. Vampire genre, 400 years of shocking love. Well, this is a good theme. Vampire movies have always been very popular. Plus, it's a work by a famous director like you. It's hard not to succeed. I believe you can definitely make an excellent work. Okay, no problem. I will call Stan personally and tell him. That's it, say hello to Sophia and the others for me. Goodbye. Eric hung up the phone, leaned back in his leather chair, and let out a tired sigh. After the trailer of Tornado was broadcasted, there were a lot of calls coming in. Some people congratulated him, some wanted to cooperate, and even more people called to test him. Many of them had only met him once or twice, but they sounded very familiar on the phone, as if they were old friends who hadn't seen each other for a long time. Eric couldn't help but think of a saying in his memory. There was a chuckle behind him. Eric tiptoed on the floor and turned the leather chair half a circle. Virginia and Joanna were flipping through a magazine together. They saw something interesting and let out a soft laugh. Are you done? Seeing Eric turn around, Virginia looked up and asked. Eric nodded and was about to get up when the cordless phone in his hand rang again. Although a little impatient, Eric quickly picked up the phone. This is Eric Williams. Virginia looked at Eric's depressed look and laughed. Oh, Mr. Goober, good evening. Eric was a little surprised when he heard the other party's name. Is there anything I can help you with? The person on the other end said something and Eric raised his eyebrows. Although he felt a little surprised, he quickly said, If there's anything, just say it over the phone. I think. Oh, I see. Then let me think about it. If it's convenient, I'll be free tomorrow night. Okay, that's it. Okay, then see you tomorrow. The next day, the news of the Washington Redskins winning the Super Bowl again appeared in countless mainstream media in North America. Of course, with the end of the annual Super Bowl, the popularity of this news was not as hot as before. However, the news of the two heavyweight villains of Batman appearing in the trailer had also become a hot topic in the newspapers and media. After all, Penguin Man and Catwoman had always been two very important villains in DC's Batman comics. Penguin Man could be said to be Batman's lifelong enemy, and Catwoman and Batman had a love-hate relationship, making it impossible for people to stop watching. In addition, Tom Cruise's stunt Dark War prequel also attracted a lot of attention. This movie was labeled as a sequel to Dark War. Coupled with the thrilling stunt scenes, it quickly attracted the attention of a large number of movie fans. In addition, there were many upcoming movies that also took the opportunity to appear in the Super Bowl trailers. But there was no doubt that these news were all squeezed to the secondary page by a shocking screen crack. The stunning blow that the trailer of Tornado smashed into the TV screen at the end left a deep impression in the hearts of countless people. And the media also responded to the curiosity of the public, and used a large number of pages to analyze the trailer of Tornado in detail. However, although many media outlets scoffed at some of the small tricks used in the trailer of Tornado, after the trailer was broadcast, it still caused a great impact. The next day, as long as someone had seen the trailer, they would basically talk about it with others. After this stunning trailer was broadcast, in a random sample survey of several summer blockbusters by The Hollywood Information, Tornado was much more anticipated than the second-place Batman. As for Dark War prequel, although it had the popularity of Tom Cruise, because of the absence of Eric and Tom Hanks, the hardcore fans generally did not have high expectations for this movie. Early the next morning, Eric sat in the conference room in high spirits and began Firefly's weekly high-level meeting. After a simple summary of the work, a group of Firefly executives in the conference room began to talk about more scattered topics. The president of Fox TV just called, hoping to get the exclusive rights to broadcast the trailer of Tornado. They are willing to broadcast it for free and not charge any advertising fees. This is a very favorable condition. Eric, what do you think? Jeffrey looked at the memo in front of him and said, among the methods of film promotion, the most expensive one was to broadcast a trailer on TV. In this era, media methods such as online promotion had not yet become popular, and TV advertising accounted for more than 70% of the publicity budget. When Eric heard Jeffrey's words, he shook his head and said, the principle of this trailer is very simple. The most important thing is to give the audience a surprise. Last night's Super Bowl live broadcast achieved the effect it should have, so it will not be broadcast again. Instead, it will be the normal version of the trailer. Michael, how is the European release of Tornado going? Michael Lynn looked down at the information at hand and said, the 5 main countries in Europe, Britain, France, Germany, Italy, and West, have basically reached an agreement. However, the earliest release time is at the end of July. In addition to the local protection, the most important thing is that we don't have strong channels and connections. Warner's Batman has been released in Britain, Germany, and Spain at the same time. The other countries in Europe also released it earlier than us. Eric was a little disappointed, but he also knew that this kind of thing could not be rushed. Any film company's distribution channels were expanded little by little. However, he still couldn't help but look at Katzenberg sitting on the other side, hoping to hear some good news from Katzenberg. Of course, Katzenberg knew what Eric meant. He thought for a while and said, Bowie International completely broke away from Warner's distribution network 2 years ago. In the past 2 years, Disney has mainly focused on the distribution network in the 5 European countries: Britain, France, Germany, Italy, and Spain. After all, the box office of these 5 countries accounted for more than 70% of the total box office in Europe. In the small countries such as the Netherlands and Belgium, Disney mostly just sold the distribution. Eric held the pen between his fingertips and gently tapped the folder in front of him. He quickly calculated in his heart. It seemed that it was still a matter of time. Although it was the best choice to integrate Disney's overseas distribution with Firefly's existing channels, Disney and Firefly were still in the business docking period. It would take at least a year or 2 to carry out similar integration. Moreover, from the bottom of his heart, Eric did not want Firefly to completely digest Disney. Disney could only create more benefits by maintaining its own brand. After all, this was a brand that had been operating in Hollywood for more than half a century. Although it only rose under the leadership of Michael Eisner in the late 1980s, no one could deny Disney's influence. Let's do this for the time being. After making up his mind, Eric remembered what happened last night. By the way, after the trailer of Tornado was played last night, Columbia's CEO, Peter Guber, personally called and said that he hoped to cooperate with Firefly in the film. I haven't decided yet. What do you think? There was a whisper of discussion in the conference room. After a while, Michael Lynn spoke first. Obviously, after Michael Eisner took charge of the world, Peter Guber and Chang Peters felt the crisis. Columbia's situation in the past 2 years has been very bad. They are worried that they will go the same way as Sid Sheinberg, but I don't think cooperation is necessary. The most important thing now is to develop our own strength. I agree with Mike, Jeffrey said. Some other executives in the conference room also spoke in agreement. In their opinion, cooperating with Columbia was a waste of time. Instead of cooperating with Columbia, it was better to cooperate with second- and third-tier film companies with good development potential. At least in this kind of cooperation, Firefly would definitely play an absolute leading role. Everyone discussed for a while. After the conference room was quiet for a while, Jeffrey Katzenberg, who had not spoken, said, Eric, I think this is an opportunity. At this point, Katzenberg suddenly felt that it was not appropriate to say his thoughts directly in front of so many people. Katzenberg did not care about everyone's gaze and directly changed his tone. Eric, for the sake of confidentiality, I think we should talk in private. In the entire conference room, Katzenberg's status was almost second only to Eric. When he said such words, although the others were unhappy, they did not dare to show it. No problem. Let's talk in my office later. So, does anyone have any questions? Eric looked around and saw that no one said anything, So he announced the end of the meeting. Seeing everyone get up, Eric waved to stop the few people who were about to leave and said, "Jeffrey, Michael, and Frank, you all come together." After the other executives in the conference room dispersed, Eric walked into his office with Katzenberg and others. The secretary served coffee for the 5 people, closed the office door and left. Eric said, "Jeffrey, can you talk now?" Katzenberg said, "Look, Peter Guber came to us to cooperate. He must have been prepared to sacrifice the interests of the Japanese. We all know that these 2 people just want to make profits for themselves through Columbia. They have no intention of running Columbia well." Now, Japan's Panasonic had replaced Michael Eisner in the management of Global, and they are worried that Sony will follow in their footsteps. That's why they approached us for cooperation. Then, we can use this opportunity to get some benefits from Columbia. When Katzenberg said this, his eyes revealed a fanatical aggressiveness. This made Jeffrey and Frank Wales, who were more conservative, frown slightly. However, Michael Lynn looked relaxed. He had seen this aura from Robert Shea, but Katzenberg's aggressiveness was obviously stronger. Although they didn't like the aura Katzenberg showed at this time, the other 4 people present knew that Katzenberg was telling the truth. The competition in Hollywood had never been tender. Since others had sent themselves to your mouth for a bite, if you didn't open your mouth, you would be no different from a fool. Katzenberg saw that the other people's faces showed agreement and said, "We just talked about the overseas distribution. Everyone should know that in Hollywood, Columbia's distribution channel network is second only to Warner. Although it has decreased in the past 2 years, its foundation is definitely not comparable to Firefly and Disney. Columbia not only has a complete film distribution company in the main European countries, but it also has branches in Brazil, Colombia, and Argentina in South America. If we can snatch it." Katzenberg made a grabbing gesture, and then looked at everyone. Eric, Jeffrey, Michael, and Frank all showed excited expressions and began to talk. Eric looked at Katzenberg's determined expression, and was a little excited. He knew that Katzenberg was definitely better at negotiation than him. After everyone's whispers quieted down, Eric said to Katzenberg, "Jeffrey, I have already agreed to Peter Guber's dinner invitation last night. How about you go with me tonight?" Katzenberg had no intention of refusing. "Of course, no problem." Chapter 454. At 10 o'clock in the evening, at the door of a famous restaurant in Beverly Hills, 4 men were saying goodbye to each other. Obviously, they had a very pleasant dinner. Eric and Katzenberg watched the 2 heads of Columbia Pictures leave in a car, and then they went to their respective cars together. Once all these conditions are fulfilled, then our strength will definitely rise to a big level, and we don't know when Columbia will recover. I don't know if I should say that the Japanese are stupid. Even if they want to delegate power, they should first examine the ability of these 2 people in Hollywood. I didn't expect that the Japanese didn't do anything at all, and directly handed over a big film company to these 2 people. Katzenberg shook his head, and thought of some of the agreements reached during dinner. Eric smiled and waited for Katzenberg to finish speaking. He said, "You are wrong. Although these 2 guys did something stupid, they are actually very smart. If they can get this cooperation agreement with Firefly, they can at least stay in this position for several years. They will only sacrifice the interests of the Japanese, and it will not cause any loss to them." Katzenberg understood what Eric meant, but he still couldn't help but sigh. If the 2 of them can run the company well, they can also get enough compensation in the future. Columbia is one of the big 7 after all. Eric shrugged. "Do you think the 2 of them don't want to?" "Unfortunately, they don't have enough strength to run a big film company well. If the 2 of them had that kind of talent, they would definitely do it." The 2 cars were next to each other. When they came to the front of the car, Katzenberg didn't rush to say goodbye. Instead, he followed Eric into his car. Eric knew that Katzenberg must have something to talk about, so he moved inside and opened the car's fender to separate the driver in the front row. Of course, the fewer people who knew about the matter of poaching Columbia, the better. "Eric, instead of dividing this part of the resources for Firefly and Disney, it's better to use it to expand a distribution company. So, how about letting Bowie International take charge of this?" Katzenberg closed the door and straightforwardly put forward his request. Although Katzenberg was the one who first came up with this plan, and he was mainly responsible for negotiating with the two people from Columbia during dinner, Eric couldn't agree to Katzenberg's request. If they agreed with Katzenberg, then the strength of Disney's Bowie International Distribution Company would rise to the same level as Warner and other giants in a short period of time. Firefly's headquarters would also be left far behind. After that, Firefly's international distribution would have to rely more on Bowie International. If this continued, it would form a disadvantageous situation between Firefly and Disney. Jeffrey, what do you think of Michael Lynn? Katzenberg was taken aback. He didn't quite understand why Eric suddenly mentioned this, but after a short hesitation he said straightforwardly, "He's a very mediocre person. Although I've acquired Disney and many people think that I've reached the peak of power in Hollywood, I don't think so. The acquisition of Disney is just the beginning. I still have more things to do. For example, unifying Hollywood and integrating all 7 Hollywood film companies." "Eric, you can't do that," Katzenberg said as if he was looking at a delusional patient. "Don't talk about integrating all 7 companies. Even if you intend to acquire another big film company, it will be strictly reviewed and regulated by the Federal Trade Commission." "Of course I know that, but I can't do that directly. I can use other methods, and I've already consulted some people. This method is absolutely fine, and it won't violate the Federation's anti-monopoly laws. I even have my next target in mind." Eric's expression didn't change as he replied, "However, Firefly will always be the leader of this business empire in my imagination. It's the window for me to show my strength to the outside world. Only by showing enough overwhelming advantage can I make my opponents submit. So you have to know that this time, Columbia's resources can only be given to Firefly's headquarters." Katzenberg was about to refute, but Eric continued, "I just asked you what you think of Michael. In fact, my opinion is the same, but Firefly is in the development stage. What we need is a leader who is aggressive. Although I can produce high box office movies, I'm not good at management." Katzenberg instantly understood something, and a hint of joy flashed across his face. 2 years. Eric stretched out 2 fingers and said, "Michael's contract still has 2 years. In these 2 years, as long as Disney can achieve impeccable results, I will let you replace Michael and take charge of Firefly Group." Katzenberg quickly calculated and quickly made a decision. "Eric, then the resources of Columbia can be given to Firefly's headquarters, but as for the cooperation in the film industry, I hope it can be in the name of Disney." "No problem." Eric quickly agreed. He remembered how Katzenberg ruthlessly squeezed Jobs' Pixar Studios in the original Space-Time. Eric smiled and said, "Although we have reached an agreement, you should talk to the 2 of them about the specific contract. Not only do you have to let Sony's headquarters feel that this is great news, but you also have to fight for enough benefits for us." Anyway, this cooperation was definitely a one-time deal. Eric believed that Katzenberg would definitely not show any mercy. "I will prepare a negotiation plan." Katzenberg nodded. After discussing the matter, he opened the door and left Eric's car. "Hello, Mr. Williams." "Good evening, Mr. Williams." After Eric returned to the Sharp Corner Manor and walked into the villa, he heard a pair of crisp, lowly voices. The little girls who could be selected for the Mickey Mouse Club all had very nice voices, but Eric felt his scalp tingle. "Good evening, Mr. Williams." Drew, who was wearing a denim jacket that exposed her navel, stood up with a smile. She also imitated Brittany and Christina's voices and greeted Eric in a coquettish manner. Eric glanced at the pile of shopping bags on the sofa and knew what Drew had done with the 2 Lolas. However, that was not his concern. He subconsciously looked at his watch. It was already past 11 o'clock. He felt a faint chill in his heart, and he reached out to pull Drew out of the small living room. "Why are they here? And it's already past 11 o'clock. Why are they still here?" Eric asked in a low voice. "Don't worry." Drew, of course, knew what Eric was worried about. She explained, "I came here directly by helicopter. No one knows that the 2 of them are here." "But they know, don't they? Besides, if the 2 of them don't go home for the night, Their parents will ask about this matter. Now send them away immediately. Drew still wanted to refute, but Eric glared at her sternly. Haven't you heard about Woody and Alan? You don't want me to get into such trouble, do you? All right. I'll send them back now. Drew turned around and returned to the living room, a little disgruntled. Eric went to the kitchen to look for something to eat, a little depressed. He was thinking about how he should deal with the unscrupulous little girl later. While he was warming up the milk, a small figure walked in like a cat. Eric turned around sharply and saw Christina's figure. Mr. Williams, my mother has returned to Pennsylvania. I told my mother that I'll be staying at Miss Drew's house for the time being. Can I stay tonight? I promise I won't cause any trouble. Eric looked Christina up and down. Although he was a man and was not interested in women's luxury goods, he could tell that the girl's outfit Christina was wearing was definitely not cheap. The shiny bracelet on the girl's hand was definitely a real gem, and not some imitation. Although she was a child star on Disney's Children's Channel, these were definitely not things that Christina could afford now. Obviously, these were all Drew's handiwork. With Drew's scheming mind, Eric quickly understood that the little girl was obviously trying to develop the materialistic complex in the two Lola's hearts. Mr. Williams, Christina called out softly when she saw Eric looking at her. One of her small hands was still holding the door frame tightly, looking pitiful. Although he knew that Christina's pitiful look was mostly an act, Eric could not bring himself to reject her. All right, you can sleep in the same room as Drew later. Christina was so happy that she almost jumped up. She thanked him excitedly and went up to him eagerly. Mr. Williams, I know how to cook too. Can I prepare supper for you? Eric raised the glass of warm milk in his hand. No need, a glass of milk is enough for me. Let's go out. Okay. Christina followed Eric out of the kitchen like a little tail. Brittany was obviously unhappy when she heard that Christina could stay, but Eric was firm. Brittany's father had a criminal record, and Eric did not want to get himself into trouble because of that greedy bastard. Eric soon sent a car to drive Brittany, who was clearly reluctant to leave. Eric, look, what do you think of this tie? Bob, Chris, and I spent a long time looking for it. When they returned to the villa, Drew picked out a tie from the shopping bags and gestured in front of Eric. Eric had been busy the whole day and planned to go to bed after drinking his milk. He was not in the mood to care about that. He glanced at it casually and said, "Not bad." Drew stuck his tongue out. He knew that he had made Eric depressed again, so he stopped teasing him. He obediently leaned over and said, "The filming for Disguised Stranger is already 30% done. Also, Liz and I recently bought 2 comedy scripts. Do you want to take a look?" "Forget it. Since you've already bought them, they must be good." Eric shook his head. Also, Jim Carrey has been courting Claudia Schiffer recently. The little girl saw that Eric was not interested, so she started gossiping. Eric was stunned for a moment before he asked, "Isn't Jim Carrey married?" "Yeah, all men are like that. They eat from the bowl but look at the pot. But Claudia doesn't even care about him. She's keeping her chastity for you," the little girl said. Christina, who was pretending to be obedient, heard the first half of Drew's sentence. She stared at Drew and then at Eric. Drew soon realized that he had said something wrong. He rubbed himself against Eric and said, "I'm not talking about you." Eric finished his milk and put down the empty cup. He pinched Drew's tender face and said, "Go to bed early. I'm going to rest now." After Eric's figure disappeared, Drew quickly turned from a docile kitten to a wild kitten. He imitated Eric and pinched Christina's face. "See, Eric is easy to get along with." Christina nodded and lowered her head slightly, her big eyes darting around. Drew did not mind the girl's thoughts. He looked at the shopping bags in the living room and said, "Let's pack up and go to bed." Christina obediently packed up with Drew, but she could not help but ask, "Drew, why aren't there any servants in the villa?" "Why aren't there any? There are dozens of people living in the villa. But other than the routine cleaning work, Eric doesn't like irrelevant people coming in." Drew looked at Christina with a smile. "So you're very lucky. Normal people can't come in at all." Christina nodded obediently. After the two of them packed up the shopping bags, Drew brought the girl to his bedroom. Seeing Drew go into the bathroom to take a shower, Christina finally had a moment of relief. She no longer restrained herself and cheered silently before pouncing on the bed in front of her. Her parents were divorced. She had been living in a rented house in Burbank with her mother's film crew. Although the mother and daughter lived a much better life than Brittany's family, their living conditions were still worlds apart compared to the Pointy Corner manor. Just as Eric had thought, Drew had been educating the two Lolas about money, and the results were remarkable. The two girls had seen the luxurious upper-class life in Hollywood. In a short period of time, their minds had changed greatly. They even developed a sense of disgust towards their previous environment. The two girls had been trying their best to please Drew, hoping that Drew could help them escape their original environment and enter the world they had recently seen. Chapter 455. Katzenberg was worthy of his title as a workaholic. Less than 2 weeks after confirming the intention of cooperation with Columbia, he negotiated a specific cooperation agreement with the other party. 2 weeks seemed not short, but for a 3-year cooperation involving hundreds of millions of dollars, reaching a specific cooperation agreement in 2 weeks could only be described as fast. While confirming the cooperation, Columbia's CEO, Peter Guber, couldn't wait to disclose this good news of great significance to Columbia to the media. "I hope that this movie can be shot on the spot, and in the form of a black and white documentary. In addition, the investment can't be less than $30 million US. In the Universal office, Spielberg was discussing the movie adaptation of the book Schindler's Ark with Michael Eisner. After a period of contact, Michael Eisner finally reached an understanding with Spielberg. At least Spielberg no longer gave him the cold shoulder. Although Michael Eisner was at the top of Hollywood's power, for Spielberg, who had been able to bring huge profits to big film companies since Jaws in the 1970s, he didn't need to please anyone in Hollywood. On the contrary, the CEOs of film companies and Hollywood actors had to curry favor with him in order to cooperate. Even if Captain Hawk didn't do well some time ago, it didn't cause much damage to Spielberg's status in Hollywood. With a smile on his face, Michael Eisner quietly listened to Spielberg's conditions and thought quickly in his mind. According to Spielberg's idea, he wanted to make Schindler's Ark as a black and white documentary, and he also wanted to use German and Polish. These two conditions together were almost equivalent to cutting off the possibility of the movie making a profit. Moreover, although $30 million US was not a lot of investment for Universal, whose debt ratio had reached 45%, $30 million US was not a small amount. Although Michael Eisner was also Jewish, he did not have a strong sense of historical responsibility. He only wanted to do his own business well, lead Universal to rise, and take back the glory and status he had lost. Therefore, in order to cooperate with Spielberg in the future, Michael Eisner knew that he had to agree. There was no other choice. "Steven, I can promise you that. In addition, Global will try its best to contact the Polish side for you to seek local support." After Spielberg finished speaking, Michael Eisner thought for a moment and agreed. At the same time, he raised his hand to look at his watch. "It's almost 5 o'clock now. How about we have dinner together?" Just as Spielberg was about to refuse, he heard someone urgently knocking on Michael Eisner's office door. Michael Eisner frowned, somewhat displeased. He apologized to Spielberg before letting him in with a deep voice. "Mr. Eisner, I think you need to take a look at this." Although the assistant noticed Michael Eisner's displeased look, he knew that if he didn't inform him immediately, it was very likely that he wouldn't be able to keep his job. Michael Eisner took the evening newspaper from the assistant and quickly glanced at the title on it. He immediately widened his eyes in surprise. How is this possible? Spielberg noticed the shocked look on Michael Eisner's face and also looked over. Firefly holding hands, Sony Pictures will jointly develop 5 movies in the next 3 years. The bold font came into view. Spielberg wanted to continue reading the content of the news, but Michael Eisner had already read 10 lines of the news at a glance. "Sorry, Steven, maybe I can't have dinner with you." Michael Eisner finished reading the news and stood up. Spielberg also stood up tactfully and left the global headquarters under the escort of Michael Eisner. After personally sending Spielberg to the car, Michael Eisner immediately waved the newspaper in his hand to his assistant. Besides this, is there any other news? The assistant shook his head. No, but this news is absolutely accurate. It is said that Columbia's CEO, Peter Guber, personally revealed it to the reporters. He would never lie about this kind of thing. Michael Eisner took the mobile phone from his assistant and skillfully dialed Peter Guber's private cell phone number without looking at the address book. Unfortunately, the phone was busy. After dialing for more than 10 minutes, Michael Eisner found Chang Peter's number, but it was still the same. It seemed that the two people on the other side were now busy dealing with all kinds of inquiries. Tell someone to collect all the information about this matter as soon as possible. The more detailed, the better. Michael Eisner hung up again and said to his assistant, "I've already sent someone to do it," the assistant said with a tone of wanting to take credit. However, the emotional Michael Eisner did not have much reaction. He directly turned and hurried to the office. He had to discuss this matter with Global's executives as soon as possible. In the view of many people, Firefly, who had just acquired Disney, should not cooperate with other film companies under normal circumstances. After all, the development and integration of Disney was the next stage of Firefly's work. Moreover, Michael Eisner was also very clear that even if Firefly wanted to cooperate with other film companies, Sony Columbia should be the last choice in all aspects. After all, the two people at the helm of Columbia had already made the company a mess. In this case, cooperating with the other party was quite a stupid thing to do. Therefore, this matter was obviously not as simple as it seemed on the surface. However, in the evening paper just now, there was only some basically worthless public relations language. Except that Sony Pictures would cooperate with Firefly for 5 movies in the next 3 years, there was no useful information at all. In the sharp corner manner, the fax machine on the round table next to him was buzzing softly. Eric sat on the space chair next to the glass curtain wall with his legs crossed, swaying his body gently. From time to time, he would take a new fax document from the side and read it on his lap. This was the preliminary cooperation agreement faxed by Katzenberg. However, this agreement was basically equivalent to the final agreement. After all, the board of directors of Sony Pictures was under the control of Peter Guber and Chang Peters. There would be no obstacles to the contract being approved by the board of directors. As for the Japanese, it was just a formality and telling them that such a thing had happened. Judging from the document, Katzenberg was indeed worthy of being called the Golden Retriever by some people in Hollywood. If the Japanese could understand the series of twists and turns, they would definitely understand that they had been ruthlessly cut off a piece of meat. In the contract, the two parties agreed to jointly develop 5 big-budget movies within 3 years. The investment scale of each movie was between $50 million and $100 million. However, the first clause that was disadvantageous to Columbia was that the movie production would be led by Disney, and Columbia had to use its own resources to fully cooperate. Due to the perfect financial supervision system, it was impossible to cheat the budget. However, it would be a big mistake if an outsider thought so. For example, the special effects for the 5 blockbusters would definitely be developed by Firefly's digital domain. In that case, there would be a lot of room for manipulation. In the end, Firefly's side would only be left to write, and Columbia's money would not return to its pockets. Moreover, although the special effects share of the total cost was not as terrifying as 80% of the total cost in Lin Huang's previous life, it was definitely more than 50%. In addition, Columbia only had 40% of the investment power of the 5 movies. Although the box office, videotape, and TV broadcast income will be divided according to the profit margin, the peripheral income of the movie, such as toy development, stage play, image licensing, and so on, will be completely monopolized by Disney. Although the two parties cooperated on live-action movies, and the peripheral income is not as huge as that of animated movies, this part of the profit is definitely in the hundreds of millions. Most importantly, in terms of movie copyright, Katzenberg used the comic company's method of licensing the movie copyright. Although the contract stated that the two parties would share the copyright according to the investment ratio, if the two parties did not reach an agreement on a sequel within 5 years of the movie's release, then the movie copyright that belonged to Columbia will automatically return to Disney. This basically means that Disney owns the copyright of the movie, and Columbia's position is slightly higher than those external investors who do not share the copyright. They have the copyright for 5 years longer than the external investors. It can be seen that according to the investment ratio, Disney's share of the copyright is 20% higher than Columbia's. If a movie is a big hit, unless Columbia is willing to give up most of the benefits in terms of the sequel, as long as Disney drags on for 5 years, the movie copyright will return to their hands. At that time, they don't have to pay attention to Columbia and can enjoy this fat meat alone. Reading the unequal contract in his hand, Eric wasn't too surprised. After all, after staying in Hollywood for a few years, he already understood that there was a lot of flexibility and cooperation when it came to investing in movies. As long as both parties were willing, and as long as it didn't obviously violate federal laws, any strange contract could be signed. As for Columbia, even the Japanese, it is likely that they will not refuse this agreement. Compared to the movies that caused huge losses in the previous 2 years, cooperation with Firefly, which has been creating box office miracles, undoubtedly has some guarantee in terms of profits. Moreover, in the past few years of the acquisition of Columbia, what the Japanese want most is not profits. Instead, they hope to open up the market through a few successful works. This unequal contract may be very normal in the eyes of the Japanese. After all, others play by themselves. If you don't pay more, why should others play with you? However, what they don't know is that behind this relatively normal contract, there is another unknown agreement. This agreement will greatly improve the strength of Firefly, and Columbia's perfect global distribution network will definitely be in disarray after this agreement is implemented. Thinking of this, Eric picked up the Motorola next to him that has been turned off in order to avoid harassment. After thinking about it, he got up and got another spare phone. After turning it on, he dialed Katzenberg's number. He was lucky. After a few busy calls, the call was connected smoothly. "Jeffrey, I have read the contract. I'm sorry, I just turned off my phone. You know, a lot of things have not been settled yet. I don't want to hear any probing. This is my spare phone number, you can write it down." Eric casually reported his mobile phone number, then said, "I have no opinion on the contract terms, but do you get the information of Columbia's overseas distribution network?" "Oh, okay. Get someone to fax me a copy. I plan to take a look." "Okay. No, you go alone tonight. I won't join in the fun." "Haha, then goodbye." After hanging up the phone, Eric put the Motorola Micro TAB aside, picked up the contract next to him, and read it quietly. A few minutes later, the fax machine buzzed again. "If you want to inquire about the news, why do you have to drag me along? Emma is still at home." The red BMW arrived at the entrance of the Sharp Corner Manor. Julia complained to Elizabeth, who was honking fiercely. The security guard recognized the two people in the car and quickly opened the door. Elizabeth stepped on the accelerator and drove the car in. She said, "If I come alone, he will definitely scold me again." "If the two of us are together, won't he scold you?" After walking into the manor, Julia took off the sunglasses on her face and looked at the surrounding scenery. Speaking of which, she had forgotten how long it had been since she came here. Julia's feelings for Eric had always been very complicated, so she tried to avoid meeting Eric. "Of course he will, but you can definitely bear some of it for me, right?" Elizabeth said with a smile. "Sigh, meeting you is really the biggest misfortune in my life." Elizabeth parked the car and shook her head. "Wrong, meeting Eric is the misfortune. Both of you." Julia picked up her bag and got out of the car with Elizabeth. When they came to the door of the mansion, Julia watched Elizabeth skillfully press the password lock of the door and felt a little jealous. She still didn't know what the password was. "It's his birthday, but it's upside down." Elizabeth looked at Julia's face and patted her with a smile. "What does it have to do with me?" Julia pretended to not care, but she silently remembered it. Chapter 456. The two women walked through the hall of the villa and quickly found Eric. The last rays of the setting sun shone through the glass wall and shone on him. Surrounded by the alternating light and shadow, Eric, who was reading seriously, exuded a quiet, calm, and charming temperament. Elizabeth and Julia slowed down their footsteps at the same time, not wanting to disturb this scene. However, the empty hall amplified the sound of the two women's high heels. Eric heard the sound of high heels tapping on the floor. He raised his head and saw the two women. He smiled and said, "I was just thinking about how to make dinner when you came over." "Oh, what do you take us for? Your dinner?" Elizabeth pulled Julia over and sat in the space chair opposite Eric. The two women were very slim, and they didn't feel crowded in the spacious egg-shaped space chair at all. Eric looked at the two women who were swaying gently in the space chair opposite him. He still had a smile on his face as he said, "I mean, someone is here to cook for me. But if you want to cook for me personally, I don't mind. It's a feast for the eyes." This sentence sounded almost like a joke, and Julia's face turned slightly red. Elizabeth snorted softly and said, "Do you know that when you were sitting alone in the corner just now, you looked very much like the villain hiding behind the scenes and scheming against the main character in the movies?" Eric didn't mind Elizabeth's sarcasm at all. He went along with her and said, "Yes, this kind of big villain usually has a few enchanting beauties by his side. Once you two come over, the picture will be complete." Julia couldn't help but chuckle. Elizabeth was always like a cat in a state of anger when she was with Eric. It was as if she instinctively wanted to argue with Eric, but she never got any advantage. "Hey, whose side are you on?" Elizabeth heard Julia's laughter and couldn't help but pinch her waist. Julia smiled and pushed Elizabeth's little hand away. She said, "What does it have to do with me? Can't I laugh? Hee hee, you guys continue, just pretend I don't exist." Eric looked at the two girls who were quickly scratching each other. He lowered his head and flipped through the documents with a smile on his face. Then he pulled out a few sheets from the thick stack of documents in front of him and handed them over. "Here for you." Elizabeth had actually noticed what Eric was reading when she first arrived. Although she only glanced at it a few times, she was sure that it was the copy of the contract between Firefly and Columbia. Seeing that Eric took the initiative to hand it to her, she quickly stopped playing with Julia and took it with a smile. However, her eyes were unsatisfied as she glanced at the folder on Eric's lap. There were still dozens of pages there. Eric stretched out his hand and pressed down on the remaining documents. He shook his head and said, "You can't read these. So stingy." Elizabeth pouted and grumbled, but obediently retreated. When Elizabeth sat down next to her, Julia curiously leaned over to read a few lines. However, she quickly lost interest in the densely packed letters. She raised her head and noticed that Eric was looking at her. Julia frantically avoided his gaze a few times, but in the end, she timidly went up to him. She couldn't help but have some unknown expectations in her heart. "You've been so willful and lazy for a year. Kapoor must be mad, right?" Eric asked softly as he twirled the pencil in his hand. "I'm not willful. I've been taking care of Emma. Also, Kapoor has so many big names in his hands now. He doesn't care about me," Julia argued. However, her tone didn't sound confident at all. Since TG was established, although they hadn't produced many films, they were all extremely successful. With the 30% of TG's shares in her hands, Julia received dividends that were several times higher than her salary. In comparison, Julia's enthusiasm to act suddenly weakened a lot. Eric didn't seem to hear Julia's argument. He gently tapped the blue plastic cover of the folder with the pencil in his hand and said, "It's been so long since Pretty Woman. You can pick up the romantic comedy theme again. I'll find some time to get someone to pick a script for you." Julia nodded obediently. When Elizabeth, who had quickly finished reading the few thin pages in front of her, heard Eric's words, she couldn't help but say, "How can you be so domineering? You didn't even ask if Julia was willing." Eric glanced at her lightly. His expression clearly said, "Is this your first day knowing me?" Elizabeth turned her head to look at Julia, hoping that she could resist Eric's violence with her. However, when she saw Julia's submissive look, the anger in her heart instantly dissipated. If this disappointing girl doesn't have any objections, why should I worry? "Hey, what's going on?" Elizabeth waved the few pages of the contract in her hand and changed the topic to the purpose of her trip. Eric said, "It's just like what you see. Cooperation to develop a movie. A win-win situation for everyone. Everyone is happy. I don't believe your nonsense, Elizabeth said. Although this contract is a bit harsh for Columbia, if it's released with the fame accumulated by Firefly, even if the conditions are stricter, there will still be people willing to accept it. There must be an inside story, Elizabeth said, her small eyes glancing at the documents on Eric's knees. There must be the answer she wanted. Although she was asked by her father to inquire about the situation, at this time, Elizabeth also had a strong curiosity in her heart. Although some of the terms she saw were very unfavorable to Columbia, if the movie produced by the two parties could maintain Firefly's consistent box office performance, then Columbia would definitely not suffer a loss. At the same time, Columbia's parent company, Sony Pictures, could also use this to open up a situation in Hollywood. From this point of view, Firefly was simply giving people a pillow when they were sleepy. You said it's an inside story. Of course, I can't go around saying it. Hearing Eric admit that there was an inside story, Elizabeth's curiosity was increased by another level. She stared at the remaining documents in Eric's hands, thinking in her heart that if she suddenly went up to snatch them, how badly would Eric fry her? Eric looked at Elizabeth's eager look with great interest and deliberately pushed the documents in her direction, taking the initiative to create conditions for Elizabeth, just like a piebald snake in the Garden of Eden. Elizabeth's eyes flashed quickly and inadvertently met Eric's gaze. She suddenly felt discouraged. This man is really too hateful. Eric got up and walked over with a laugh. He took the part of the contract in Elizabeth's hands and put it in the folder. He patted the girl's face as if comforting a kitten that was not full. Okay, there are ingredients in the kitchen. Go and make dinner. If you don't want to cook, you can order takeout. I'll go to the study to make a few calls. After watching Eric's figure disappear, Julia turned her head to look at Elizabeth, the corners of her mouth still holding a smile. Hey, are we going to make dinner? No, Elizabeth said in a hateful tone. She wanted to say a few harsh words that would starve someone to death, but she quickly said, let's order takeout. Julia couldn't help but laugh inexplicably. Hee, don't laugh. Elizabeth seemed to have been hit in her sore spot. Julia laughed even louder. She held her belly and said, yes. Sorry, I can't help it. What's there to be proud of? You're not much better than me. Julia's smile did not change. Anyway, I'm better than you. You damn girl. Elizabeth pounced over. I'll let you be better than me. Let go, it hurts, it hurts. You're really coming. I won't laugh, I won't laugh. Help. The clear voices of the two women echoed in the hall for a while before it quieted down. Then it turned into low whispers. The sudden cooperation between Firefly and Columbia caused a lot of waves in Hollywood. For the next week, the North American media focused their attention on this matter. The cooperation between the two sides even received more attention than the 64th Oscars, which was to be held at the end of March. After all, such explosive and sudden news was definitely not as simple as it appeared on the surface. It must involve some deep-seated inside information that was unknown to the public. In the midst of this chaos, the nomination list for the 64th Oscars was announced on February 19th. Unsurprisingly, Dances with Wolves, which was intercepted by Eric for a year, was the big winner. It received 12 nominations, including Best Film and Best Director. Not only that, since last December, Dances with Wolves had been released for more than 10 weeks, but the weekly box office figures still remained at a high level of around 7 million, and the total box office also exceeded $100 million. Based on the reputation of Dances with Wolves, there would definitely be another box office rebound around the time of the Oscars. Then, the total box office of this movie would exceed $150 million, and it was not impossible for it to reach $200 million. Even Eric himself did not expect the amazing results of Dances with Wolves. He only remembered that this movie would be the big winner of the Oscars. However, compared to the terrifying 4-hour length of the movie, Eric did not think that this movie would do anything in the box office at first. According to normal thinking, after the movie won the Oscars, it would be successful in the video market. Therefore, Eric did not mind handing over the movie's theatrical distribution rights to Fox last year. He only kept the film's copyright and the peripheral distribution rights. Based on the current situation, Fox must be making a lot of money. After all, they did not even have the $30 million cost to buy the movie. What they did was to release the movie on a small scale, and at a low cost according to the model of a literary film. As for the public relations for the Oscars, the money spent in this era was much less than it would be a decade later. Eric was a little depressed, and the people who were more depressed were definitely the producers and Orion Pictures, who sold the movie for $30 million last year. Orion Pictures had gone through bankruptcy restructuring and had started the production business again. Noticing the amazing results of Dances with Wolves, a person in charge of Orion Pictures publicly denounced Firefly for using extremely despicable means to snatch the film's copyright in a magazine. As for the director and male lead of Dances with Wolves, Kevin Costner, who also invested in Dances with Wolves, although he did not show too much slack in participating in the public relations of the movie, he also knew that he had given up a large amount of profit. According to the profits of Dances with Wolves, Kevin Costner, who accounted for 15% of the total investment, only received $5 million from the sale price last year. Although he made $5 million, if he participated in the share, he would have received more than $10 million. This loss of profit was enough to make him want to bang his head against the wall with regret. However, Hollywood was like this. It was realistic and cruel, but full of opportunities. No one knew what would happen in the next moment. Just like Warner Brothers' first Batman, because they didn't have much expectations for the movie beforehand. In order to save money, Warner Brothers smartly signed a share agreement with Jack Nicholson, who played the supporting role of the Joker. As a result, the box office of Batman exploded. Because of the share agreement, Warner Brothers paid Jack Nicholson as much as $50 million, which was much more than the remuneration of the male and female leads, and the director of the movie combined. The cooperation agreement between Firefly and Columbia was not kept a secret. In less than a week, the executives of other Hollywood film companies knew about the contents of the agreement. This cooperation agreement basically put Columbia in the position of an external investor. Even so, it was enough to make other film companies jealous. After all, when an external investor invests in a movie, there will be losses and profits. Most of the time, the losses are more than the profits, and the number of times the profits is very few. Firefly's movies in the past few years have almost never failed. Hollywood also does not believe that Firefly will deliberately make a bad movie to cheat Columbia. That means Columbia's profits will be guaranteed. At the same time, some people also know that the reason why Sony Pictures is so eager to cooperate with Firefly is because they want to expand their business in North America. Although they can guess that there must be other hidden deals behind this agreement, the other film companies all tried to contact Firefly. Even if it was a similar cooperation agreement, they are willing to do so. As for Sony, after both parties reached a preliminary agreement, Sony also expressed great interest in this cooperation. They even proudly announced the news on the local Japanese media. After finalizing the details of the contract, both parties held a press conference to sign the contract. "Nice to meet you, Mr. Oga." Eric shook hands with the Asian man in his 60s. At the same time, he looked at him. Eric did not expect Sony to be so serious about this cooperation. Sony's current CEO, Norio Oga, had personally come to Los Angeles to attend the signing ceremony. Norio Oga was also sizing up Eric. Although he had seen Eric's information, he was still surprised to see how young Eric is. Chapter 457. Mr. Norio Oga, this is not something that can be achieved with just a few words. Eric was holding a glass of champagne in his hand as he spoke to Norio Oga. Norio Oga replied, "Of course. But Mr. Williams, we are very sincere. I hope you can consider this seriously." After the signing ceremony, there was a celebratory reception. Eric finally knew the reason why Sony's CEO came to Los Angeles. Norio Oga wanted to persuade Eric to let Firefly join the campaign to promote Sony's home video players. When Sony first developed the home video recorder, Hollywood fought a lawsuit with Sony for 10 years due to concerns about piracy. Although Sony won the lawsuit, the home video recorder market was dominated by Panasonic, who had superior performance. Sony had acquired Columbia Pictures to use Columbia's film library to promote their home video players. But for the past 2 years, Columbia had received sufficient funds from the Japanese, but they did not achieve the expected results. Firefly suddenly cooperated with Columbia, and Sony started to target Firefly. Firefly's scale was not as big as Time Warner, which had started to diversify, but its development momentum was definitely the #1 in Hollywood. If Firefly could be pulled into the camp to promote Sony's home video recorder products, then even if they could not defeat Panasonic, it would be enough to make Panasonic's home video recorder market share plummet. But even if Eric did not understand some things, he knew that in a few years, DVD would be on the rise and replace videotapes. Although Norio Oga had promised him some benefits, those benefits would take a long time to materialize. If Eric agreed, home video players would be out of the game before the benefits were materialized. The two of them chatted for a while before Norio Oga turned around and left. Eric greeted the people he was familiar with before he came to the corner of the banquet hall and found a sofa to sit down. He sipped on the champagne in his glass and planned to rest for a while. After a while, a few of Firefly's executives came over and sat beside Eric. Jeffrey asked curiously, "Eric, what did Norio Oga talk to you about?" Eric briefly explained the situation. "If we can really cooperate, it seems good. What do you think?" Jeffrey said after listening. Eric shrugged. "No idea. Let's get someone to collect some relevant information tomorrow before making a decision. However, I heard that DVD technology is already in development. If this technology can replace videotapes, we don't need to get involved in the videotape business. I've also read some information about DVD technology," Katzenberg said. "Compared to videotapes, DVD piracy costs are cheaper. I think that once this technology is popularized, it won't be a good thing for Hollywood. The emergence of television and home videotapes is not a good thing for Hollywood, but the advancement of technology is hard to stop. All we can do is follow the advancement of technology and change our survival strategy. Otherwise, we can only be eliminated." Katzenberg touched his bald head and smiled. He said, "I understand. Let's not talk about this. Eric, do you have an idea in mind about the few movies that we will cooperate with Columbia?" "Not yet," Eric shook his head. In his memory, many of the classic blockbusters were series movies. However, Eric did not want to take out movies with obvious series development value to cooperate with Columbia. After all, even if the relevant terms had been signed on the copyright, if the interests involved were too great, it would definitely be complicated in the future. "What about you? I just saw you talking to Peter Guber about something." "He hopes to take out one of the 4 big-budget movies announced by Firefly to cooperate with Columbia," Katzenberg said bluntly. "Which one?" Eric asked. Katzenberg said, "Clash of Worlds." The 4 big-budget movies announced by Firefly were Jurassic Park, Clash of Worlds, True Lies, and Speed. Among them, Jurassic Park and Clash of Worlds were special effects blockbusters. True Lies and Speed were more inclined to traditional special effects. One was a remake, and the other was a road thriller. After watching the trailer of Tornado at the Super Bowl, it was not surprising that Columbia wanted to cooperate with them to develop Clash of Worlds. They finally have some self-awareness. They didn't ask for Jurassic Park, Eric said. When Firefly released the relevant news, they had already revealed that Jurassic Park would be made into a series. It seemed that Peter Guber knew very well that Firefly would definitely not take out Jurassic Park to cooperate with them. He chose this disaster movie about a comet hitting the Earth. What do you think? Katzenberg also had some expectations in his eyes. He also hoped that Eric could take out Clash of Worlds and let Disney and Columbia develop it together. This movie was written by Eric himself. With the gimmick of a comet hitting the Earth, the possibility of failure was very small. Eric thought about it and shook his head. Firefly already had a detailed development plan for these 4 movies. Speed would be released at the end of the year. Jurassic Park and Clash of Worlds were scheduled to be released in the summer of next year. True Lies, directed by Cameron, would be produced next year and released in the summer of 1994. At that time, it would be another big gimmick. Don't forget, Kathryn Bigelow's Saving Private Ryan would also be produced next year and released on June 6, 1994, the 50th anniversary of the Normandy landing. Now that Clash of Worlds was handed over to Disney and Columbia, a lot of the preliminary work done by Firefly would be wasted. For a big film company, under normal circumstances, although the number of movies released per year was as many as 20, there were often only 3 or 4 main movies per year. Once these movies were successful, they would even account for about half of the total annual box office revenue of the film company. Therefore, it was conceivable that the film company would spend a lot of resources and energy on these movies. The 4 movies announced by Firefly were all listed as the main movies for the next 3 years. They certainly could not be changed easily. I will start work on Jurassic Park after this year's Oscars. There is still a month left. This time is enough for me to choose a few projects. If you have any good plans, you can recommend them to me. After Eric finished speaking, he looked at Michael Lynn. About that matter, how is the discussion between you and Peter Guber going? Michael Lynn looked around subconsciously. After making sure that no one was near, he whispered, "If the time is too short, it will be too obvious. I have already discussed a plan with Peter Guber. The plan will start after the Oscars and continue until the end of the year. This way, not too many people will find out." Eric was not worried that Peter Guber would play any tricks. Now the initiative was completely in Firefly's hands. If Peter Guber did not fulfill his promise, Firefly had many ways to make him pay the price. What's more, it was not their own anyway. Peter Guber had no reason to go back on his word. Eric heard that Peter Guber and Chong Peters had begun to discuss increasing their salaries. It was estimated that after 3 years, their contracts with Firefly would expire. Even if the two could not maintain their positions, they would be able to leave Columbia with full pockets. After the discussion, they began to raise their glasses and chat about relaxed topics with smiles. Some sharp-eyed guests noticed the change in mood and knew that they had finished talking about business, so they eagerly came up to them. "You guys talk. I'll leave for a while." Eric looked up by chance and saw Nicole, who was wearing a lavender dress, looking at him with a smile. He got up and said, "Eric." Seeing Eric walk in, Nicole raised her glass to him. Eric reached out and took the champagne in Nicole's hand and put it aside. He took Nicole's slender hand and said, "Let's go dance." "Okay." Nicole let Eric pull her to the dance floor. In the slow music, Eric hugged Nicole's slender waist, smelled the light fragrance on the girl's body, and said softly while dancing, "Do you know what purple represents?" Nicole looked at Eric's eyes with an inquiring look. "Purple represents nobility and mystery. Ordinary women don't dare to wear purple because they often don't have a strong enough aura. They will look neither fish nor fowl in it." Nicole's thin pink lips showed a smile. "Then what do you think of me wearing this dress?" "Your Highness, I want to get down on one knee and kiss the back of your hand," Eric said half-jokingly. Nicole glanced at the exit of the banquet hall with a teasing look in her eyes. "I'm kind of looking forward to this scene. Why don't we go out and try it?" Eric took advantage of the fact that no one was paying attention to slide his hand down Nicole's slender waist and patted her gently. "Woman, don't push your luck." Nicole glared at him with slight anger and changed her tone. She leaned over slightly and said softly, "Eric, I recently watched Jurassic Park. What do you think of me acting as Dr. Ellie Sattler? In the production plan, all the actors in this movie can only receive the minimum salary set by the union. Are you willing?" "I'm willing," Nicole answered without hesitation. Eric smiled and said, "When you said yes, you weren't thinking of anything else, were you?" Nicole's face turned slightly red. "No," Eric teased and then said seriously, "The protagonists of Jurassic Park will be those dinosaurs from ancient times. Just like Tornado, this movie doesn't have much use other than letting the actors get familiar with the audience. With your current status, it will be a waste of time for you to act in this movie. Didn't you say that you were going to prepare 2 movies for me to drive a wedge between Tom Cruise and his partners? I already have Tough Cop. What about the next one? Eric stared at the girl's slyness and realized that this was a trap waiting for him. It's getting late. I think it's better for us to go back and talk about such an important matter, Nicole said without fear. Okay. Nicole woke up at almost the same time as Eric when she felt the movements of the people around her. Nicole turned over and looked into Eric's eyes. Morning. Morning. Eric leaned over and pecked Nicole's thin lips. The warmth of the kiss warmed Nicole's heart. She reached out an arm and hugged Eric. Go to sleep. It's still early. You can sleep for another half an hour, Eric's voice sounded. Asshole, how am I supposed to sleep? Nicole was a little amused as she punched Eric's back. So half an hour of sleep was changed to morning exercise. Then, they got up and stood side by side in front of the bathroom sink. They brushed their teeth and washed their faces in front of the mirror. He shaved while she did her skincare. Then, they changed their clothes and went for a morning jog in the manor. Eric sat at the long table in the dining room and read the newspaper. Nicole was making breakfast in the kitchen opposite. Nicole put a plate of bread on the table and poured milk for them. She noticed Eric's expression and asked curiously, "What's wrong?" I suddenly thought of a story, Eric said as he looked at the bread that had just been taken out of the oven. Oh, Nicole raised her eyebrows but didn't show too much of a reaction. She passed the milk over and sat down across from Eric. Then she asked, "Okay, you can tell me. What's the story?" Eric held a piece of bread in his hand and thought for a while. The story was really simple. So he summarized it in a few words. It's very simple. Two assassins. They met by chance in a chaotic city, fell in love, and got married. Nicole took a bite of the bread and nodded. Her blonde fringe on her forehead swayed mischievously, looking a little cute. She suddenly thought of something and raised her head to ask, "Hey, the two assassins you're talking about, are they a man and a woman?" Eric stared speechlessly at the girl opposite him, whose eyes were full of slyness. Nicole pretended to be innocent and looked at Eric for a few seconds. Then, she waved her little hand and begged for mercy. "Ehe, I'm just kidding. Go on." Eric made a threatening look and continued. But they didn't know each other's identity. Although they were both super assassins in the industry, they belonged to two different assassin groups. They lived in an inconspicuous neighborhood and lived ordinary lives. They had their own cover jobs. The neighbors called them Mr. and Mrs. Smith. Chapter 458. Eric briefly explained the story outline of Mr. and Mrs. Smith, and Nicole listened attentively. After Eric finished, she said, "It doesn't sound like anything special. It'll definitely be another popcorn movie with gimmick like killer shootouts as its selling point." The rigidity of human thinking is very serious. Innovation is easy to say, but it's extremely difficult to do. 99% of Hollywood's movies can find similar companions. The key is how to film it. Nicole rolled her eyes at Eric. "I'm just saying what I think. You don't have to elevate it to the level of human, right?" Eric smiled and said, "Actually, your understanding of this story is only at the most superficial level. Of course, this definitely represents the thoughts of more than 90% of the audience. But if you deconstruct it at a deeper level, this story is a true portrayal of marriage in real life." John and Jane's marriage is the standard of love at first sight, and in reality, many marriages are the product of such impulses. However, they don't really understand each other. Although they love each other, they don't open their hearts to each other. Instead, they carefully guard against each other. This is also destined that they can't maintain their marriage for long. When the initial passion subsides, the relationship between the two sides becomes dull and boring. In the end, they have to go to psychological counseling. At the same time, they receive the order to kill each other. Because of this change, the invisible barrier between the two collapsed. As they attacked each other, they began to truly understand each other. This is very similar to a real-life marriage. When the husband and wife fall into a dispute, the other side of themselves that they have been carefully hiding will be revealed to each other. In the end, the marriage will either be reborn from the ashes or break up. After Eric finished, he saw that Nicole had put down the cutlery in her hand. She supported her chin with one hand and looked at him in a daze. What's wrong? Are you suddenly impressed by my erudition? Girl, relax. You're not the first and you won't be the last. I'm just wondering when you, John Smith, will confess your true identity to me. Eric smiled and did not answer. He knew that many people around him were very curious about how he came to be so special. Some people had asked him more than once, but this matter was destined to never be explained. Eric had no intention of explaining it to others. In many movies and novels, the protagonists often remain in a mediocre state for a long time. Because of some stimulation, they become a superhero who saves the earth, such as Superman or Spider-Man. Nicole made a look like she couldn't stand it anymore. Stop talking nonsense. I won't ask anymore. Okay, then let's continue with Mr. and Mrs. Smith. You'll be the female lead. This script can be the first collaboration between Disney and Columbia, and Paula Wagner can be the producer. It's killing two birds with one stone. Nicole nodded and looked at Eric. How about you play John Smith, Eric? Didn't you act in Back to 17? Eric shook his head. I don't have the time. Nicole also knew that she was a bit whimsical. Compared to a few years ago when he acted in Back to 17, Eric now not only had to take care of the huge Firefly film group, but he also had to personally direct Jurassic Park. As for the other movies that came from him, Eric could not completely let go of them. Under such circumstances, he could not spare half a year to act in movies. The main work of Jurassic Park would only start after the Oscars at the end of March. After the acquisition of Disney, Firefly Film Group was gradually on the right track, and the collaboration with Columbia was finalized. Eric had a month of free time. Therefore, although he did not have the time to act in Mr. and Mrs. Smith, he still had plenty of time to personally write the script. The script was 1 page per minute, and according to his memory he made slight changes according to the current time and background. In less than a week, he had typed out the script. These days, Nicole had been living in the Sharp Corner manor, personally watching Eric type out the script of Mr. and Mrs. Smith on the computer. Occasionally, when she went out with Eric, paparazzi took a few photos, and it was inevitable that there would be some gossip. After the script of Mr. and Mrs. Smith was released, both Disney and Columbia quickly saw the script. Although there were some complaints about the movie not having special effects, Columbia quickly accepted the project. After the project was confirmed, Disney and Columbia couldn't wait to start the preliminary preparations while Eric happened to have time to participate. In just a week, the budget of the movie was out. Because it was the first movie of the cooperation between the two parties, the budget was quite loose to ensure that nothing went wrong. In the screening room, Eric, Katzenberg, and Peter Guber were watching the gunfight on the screen together. Mr. and Mrs. Smith involved a lot of gunfight scenes, but on the list of directors given by Disney and Columbia, none of them could satisfy Eric. For Eric, when it came to gunfight scenes, the first thing that came to his mind was, of course, classic Hong Kong movies like Hero Itself and Bloodshed Heroes. The most important thing about Hong Kong action movies is to make the audience happy. Look, this gunfight scene, the setting of the plot, the foreshadowing of the atmosphere, and the 3-minute gunfight at the end all reflect the director's superb control skills. For Mr. and Mrs. Smith, what I want is a kind of elegant violence, a feeling that even if the male and female protagonists are holding large-caliber shotguns, it looks like they are flirting, not the cruelty and realism that Hollywood directors are better at. Eric looked at the movie and explained softly. The scene on the screen was the famous Maple Forest Pavilion gunfight in Hero Nature. The 3-minute gunfight scene without any lines was completed in one go. For the ordinary audience, this scene was just the climax of the movie, but many directors regarded this scene as an important imitation. Eric, you don't want to invite those Hong Kong directors who only know how to make B-rated movies to direct Mr. and Mrs. Smith, right? Peter Guber's tone was a little disdainful. He didn't understand the brilliance of Hero Nature. Instead, he sneered at the rough settings and images of Hong Kong movies. Why not? It's nothing. I'm just a little worried that they will screw up the movie. Peter Guber felt the toughness in Eric's tone and replied with a smile. Eric also didn't want to fall out with Peter Guber, so he explained, The film market in Hong Kong is too small. In order to ensure that they can recover the cost, the directors there have to reduce the budget. This doesn't mean that they will only make B-rated movies. Eric, do you like the director of this movie? Katzenberg pointed to the movie that was playing and asked. Eric nodded. Although in the original Spacetime, Wu Beige suddenly became obsessed with epic movies in the later stage of her career, Wind Talkers cut off her path to Hollywood, and Wheel of Peace cut off her development in the mainland. But when it came to shooting gunfights, the top few in the history of Hong Kong cinema were basically Wu Beige's works. Calculating the time, it was almost time for Wu Beige to enter Hollywood. Because Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles was still in production, Firefly had been in contact with Hong Kong. Now it was just the right time for the other party to act as a bridge. Chapter 459. Paula Wagner flipped through the information of an Asian and said to Nicole, "You're saying that Mr. Williams wants to use this Mr. John Woo as the producer of Mr. and Mrs. Smith? Although his movies have been widely praised in Southeast Asia, this is Hollywood. Can he adapt to the style of Hollywood?" Nicole took a few sips of the coffee brought by Wagner's secretary and said, "Eric said that this Asian director is used to distinguish the style of Hollywood. By the way, I also brought you a few videotapes. You can take a look at them. They are all works of this Mr. John Woo. These days, Eric and I watch them many times in the Pointy Corner manner. Although the quality of these movies is a bit rough, the plots are absolutely wonderful. Eric said that this is called violent aesthetics." Nicole took out 4 or 5 videotapes from her bag and handed them to Paula Wagner. Paula Wagner took it and put it aside. She turned to look at Nicole and said, "Nicole, Tommy has already complained about you being the producer of Tough Cop." Nicole showed a surprised expression and asked curiously, "How could that be?" Paula Wagner didn't see any flaws in Nicole's expression. Of course, she couldn't have guessed that Nicole and Eric's real purpose was to break up her partnership with Cruz. She showed a helpless expression and said, "Tommy wants me to focus on managing Cruz Wagner's production company. He's worried that if I take other jobs, it will affect the company's operations." Paula Wagner didn't mention the deeper reason. Cruz's last movie, Thunder Ambition, didn't do well, which led to his career stagnating for a year. Last year, not only did he not act in a movie, but he also parted ways with his long-term partner, Paramount. But Tough Cop, which Paula was the producer of, got $200 million at the box office with a mere 20 million yuan. Whether it was out of a man's pride or jealousy that he didn't want to admit, Cruz didn't want Paula Wagner to be the producer of Nicole's movies anymore. Tom can only produce 1 movie a year at most. With your ability, you can't affect the operations of your company, can you? When Paula Wagner heard the compliment, she couldn't help but smile. But when she thought of Cruz, her smile turned into helplessness. The purpose of Cruz and Paula opening the production company was to imitate Eric's Firefly, but the reality was often too harsh. Even if Cruz was one of the most popular stars in Hollywood, he couldn't guarantee that every movie he made would be as successful as Firefly. Of course, their production company couldn't develop as fast as Firefly. Until now, Cruz and Wagner's production company could only fight for more control and dividends in the films that Cruz starred in. They didn't even have the energy to produce other films. Cruz had a new agent, so Paula Wagner was often in a state of idleness. For a career-minded woman like her, this was a kind of torture. "Nicole, I don't understand. Why did you invite me to be the producer of Tough Cop and this, Mr. and Mrs. Smith?" Nicole was stunned at first, then a touch of blush appeared on her face. She said a little hesitantly, I want to be more important to him, but among the people I know, you're the only one. Anyway, you understand. If Eric were here, he would definitely say, this vixen is too pretentious. If Drew were here, he would also say, this bitch is too pretentious. Unfortunately, the person here was Paula Wagner, who had no idea what was going on. Hearing Nicole's hesitant reply, Paula quickly came up with the image of an infatuated girl who was trying her best to please her lover. Hey Nicole, how are you and Mr. Williams now? Since he broke up with Jennifer Aniston, he hasn't revealed his girlfriend, right? He'll only be 22 in a few months, and he's already sitting in the top few seats in Hollywood. I can't expect too much. I just hope that when he's tired, he'll settle down." Nicole's tone was light, but this time she spoke her mind. Paula Wagner had been in Hollywood much longer than Nicole. She had seen a lot of Hollywood playboys who didn't want to get married until they were 40 or 50 years old. When she heard Nicole's words, she couldn't help but say, "Then you might have to wait a long time." Nicole reached out and touched the necklace around her neck. At the end of the necklace, there was a very special ring hidden in a heart-shaped pendant. Her ring was the 9 of hearts. She remembered that when she asked Eric to pick for her, he talked about the meaning of a series of numbers. When it came to the 9 of hearts, he said that 9 in the East meant everlasting, so she decisively chose this one. "Nicole?" Paula Wagner saw that Nicole was in a daze, so she reminded her. "Oh." Nicole raised her head and came back to her senses. She quickly put those messy emotions behind her and said, "Then Paula, about Mr. and Mrs. Smith. If you really can't accept it, I'll get Eric to contact someone else as soon as possible. This film is rushed, and Columbia hopes to release it in November at the end of the year. That means there are only 8 months left. The pre-production, official filming, and post-production will take at least half a year." Paula Wagner stared at the information in front of her and was a little reluctant to give up. Lethal Cop had earned more than $200 million at the global box office, and she had received a salary of $5 million plus dividends. This was the largest single income she had ever received in her career. When she was Cruise's producer, she only received a 10% share of Cruise's salary, and the highest annual income was $1 or $2 million. Cruise and Wagner's production company didn't have the good luck of encountering Mission Impossible in the original universe. "Nicole, if you can let Tommy play the male lead in Mr. and Mrs. Smith, this will be much easier." Nicole revealed an awkward expression. She raised her hand and gestured with the tip of her nose. "This you know." Paula Wagner smiled and reminded her, "Don't do this in front of Tommy. He hates it when people mention his height." "Of course I know," Nicole said with a smile. Although Cruise was a Hollywood A-list actor, the joke about him stepping on an apple box had been circulating in and out of Hollywood. If Mr. and Mrs. Smith was a Columbia project, Paula Wagner was sure that Columbia would give up Nicole for the more famous Tom Cruise and choose another moderately tall female lead. However, the possibility of this happening was very low, because from the chat just now, Paula Wagner knew that this movie was specially prepared for Nicole by Eric. "How about this, Nicole? I'll talk to Tommy. I'll give you an answer by the day after tomorrow. Is that okay?" Just as Nicole was about to nod, Paula Wagner's door knocked twice before it was pushed open. Cruise and Kinsley walked in one after another. Nicole and Paula Wagner stood up together. Cruise was about to say something when he saw Nicole. His eyes flickered, and he politely greeted her. "Hello, Miss Kidman." "Hello, Mr. Cruise," Nicole replied with a smile. She walked past Cruise to Kinsley and hugged her. "Nicole, why are you here?" Kinsley asked curiously. Nicole let go of Kinsley and sat down with her on the sofa. She smiled and asked, "I'm here to discuss something with Paula. What about you guys? Didn't you say you were going to New York the day before yesterday? Why are you back so soon?" "Oh, we're going to record a talk show for Dark War prequel. We rushed back after that. Anyway, there's nothing to do in New York. By the way, I brought you a gift," Kinsley said as she took out a small box from her handbag. Inside it was a very small but very delicate glass bottle. "I met a friend in the fashion industry in New York. He gave it to me. It's the latest Dior perfume. It hasn't been released to the market yet. It's just a small trial. Paula, there's yours." Feeling Paula Wagner's gaze, Kinsley quickly took out another small box and handed it to her. Nicole opened the small box and carefully sprinkled some perfume on the back of her hand. She sniffed it and excitedly commented with Paula Wagner, who came over. Tom Cruise, who instantly felt neglected, asked Paula Wagner's secretary to make coffee for him out of boredom. He sat down on the sofa opposite them and accidentally caught a glimpse of a stack of documents on the short table. He picked it up curiously and flipped through it. At the top was information about an Asian director. Cruise was not interested and quickly flipped through it. Below it was the budget of a movie called Mr. and Mrs. Smith. Cruz looked at the amount, and his eyes flashed. He flipped through it again. At the bottom was the script of Mr. and Mrs. Smith. I feel that the smell of this one is too strong. Paula's perfume, however, is very compatible with her temperament. No, Nicole, you should try more of this smell. It'll definitely make men fall head over heels for you. Yes, I specially picked it for you. How can it be wrong? While the three women were chatting, Cruz shook the documents in his hand and raised his voice. Paula, which company invited you to do this script? Only then did Paula Wagner realize that she had unknowingly neglected Cruz. She put away the bottle of perfume in her hand and said, Tommy, Nicole brought this script. She wants me to be the producer. I said I would discuss this with you later. Cruz's originally excited mood immediately disappeared. Although he was not gloomy, he did not look good either. Paula, you agreed? Paula Wagner was a little uncomfortable with Cruz's questioning tone, but she patiently said, I think I should be able to allocate my time. Anyway, you won't be thinking about your next movie before Dark War prequel is released. I don't have to interfere with the promotion of Dark War prequel either. There's plenty of time. But now it's time to choose the script for my next movie. And didn't I tell you? Cruz stopped and stared at Nicole unkindly. Nicole pretended to be embarrassed. She stood up and said to Paula Wagner, Sorry, Paula, I think I should go. Anyway, give me a call. Paula Wagner nodded and watched Nicole walk out of the door. However, compared to Paula Wagner and Cruz, who had worked together for many years, Paula Wagner and Cruz did not have much of a personal relationship. At this time, she also stood up and said, Then I'll leave you two to chat. I'll leave first. Cruz stared fiercely at Paula's back. He had hoped that Paula would be his exclusive agent, but after signing with him, she quickly signed with Nicole Kidman. Moreover, with the success of Tough Cop, Cruz clearly felt that Paula Wagner had diverted more attention to Nicole. This made him, who had always been the center of attention, very unhappy. Now that Paula Wagner had followed him out for Nicole, Cruz even thought of changing agents. Paula Wagner clearly felt the change in Cruz's mood. In her eyes, Cruz was like a spoiled child. She sighed slightly and said, Tommy, I think we should have a good talk. Leaving the office of Cruz and Wagner Productions, Nicole heard the sound of leather shoes behind her. She turned around and waited for Parker Kingsley to walk up to her. Why are you here? Is everything okay with Tom? She asked. Paula Wagner rolled her eyes at Nicole. I'm just his agent, not his nanny. I don't have the responsibility to make him happy. At this time, it was more effective to get close to her than to provoke her. Nicole smiled and held Paula Wagner's arm. Then I'll treat you to dinner. You can choose the place. Don't feel bad about it later. Kingsley's interest was piqued. Thinking of Cruz's sour expression, Kingsley suddenly felt that if she had to choose between Cruz and Nicole, she would definitely choose the shrewd and amiable Nicole, even if the salary was a little lower. Although Cruz had always been the perfect public figure in the hearts of film fans, only she, as the person involved, knew how difficult it was to perfectly maintain Cruz's public image. Take yesterday's talk show for example. After the recording, Cruz suddenly felt that the way he appeared wasn't perfect enough. The camera didn't even wait for him to smile before it hit his face. Hence, they had to re-record it. It was just a few seconds of footage, which was simply unreasonable. However, Cruz's attitude was firm. As his manager, she had no choice but to rush back and forth to communicate with the television station. For this, she even owed them a big favor. Chapter 460. After having lunch with Pi Kingsley, Nicole received a call from Paula Wagner when she came out of a restaurant. Although the sound quality of the Motorola Microtac, which relied on analog signal transmission, wasn't very good, Nicole could still hear the helplessness and disappointment in Paula Wagner's tone. Seeing Nicole hang up the phone, Paula, who had been listening to the conversation, asked, Did Paula reject him? Nicole nodded. Paula Wagner still chose Cruz this time, but Nicole wasn't discouraged. Although Paula Wagner had given up Mr. and Mrs. Smith for Cruz's production company, there was already a gap between the two of them. If Cruz's movie was a big success, everything would be fine. But if things went in the opposite direction, it was only a matter of time before they broke up. That's easy to understand. After all, Paula and Tom have worked together for so many years, and between them. Parker Kingsley shrugged and did not continue. But Nicole knew that it was nothing more than the trivial matter between the agent and the actor. But based on Nicole's understanding of Cruz's character, it was definitely Paula Wagner who had been accommodating Cruz. Nicole was not interested in gossiping with Paula. She was about to call Eric to tell him about it when Paula's phone rang. "Hey, I'm Parker Kingsley. Paula." Parker Kingsley raised her eyebrows and looked at Nicole beside her. She continued, "Is there anything you need from me?" A few minutes later, Parker Kingsley hung up the phone with a complicated expression. She stood there in a daze. Paula Wagner called to inform her that Tom Cruise wanted to terminate his contract with her. Nicole also heard this. Seeing Paula in a daze, she said, "I'm sorry, Paula. I didn't expect this." "It's not your fault, Nicole." Kingsley quickly smiled as if a burden had been lifted from her shoulders. "Actually, this is good too. I've always wanted to represent more artists, but he's already like this after signing you. It's only a matter of time before we part ways." Nicole stepped forward and held Paula's arm. She whispered, "How about I treat you to dinner?" "All right, I've already said that it's not your fault." Patricia was a few years older than Nicole. Looking at Nicole's girlish appearance, the grudge in her heart disappeared. "Also, let me remind you, you've already eaten enough just now. For the sake of your figure, I suggest you exercise for at least half an hour at night. Don't be careless about these things. Many female celebrities slowly lose their figure because they don't pay attention to these small details." I know. Nicole nodded obediently. "Then what are you going to do in the afternoon?" "My contract with Cruz still has a year and a half left. He wants to terminate the contract unilaterally. Of course, I have to discuss the compensation with him." Paula replied. "Also, I already have my eyes on a few good actors. Since I'm terminating my contract with Cruz, I can talk to them about signing contracts." "Hey, you don't mind me signing contracts like Cruz, do you?" Nicole didn't mind. Of course, Nicole didn't mind. After Cruz left, she was Parker Kingsley's biggest trump card. Even if she signed someone else now, Parker Kingsley would spend most of her energy on her for a long time to come. Moreover, the biggest role of a manager was to guide the career development of an artist. In this aspect, Nicole had a better candidate than Parker Kingsley. "Just sign them. If their acting skills are good, I can help you talk to Eric and get you a few auditions. But it's just an audition. I can't guarantee whether they will succeed or not. It still depends on their abilities." The audition quota that he got directly from Eric would definitely involve a big production movie that was directly controlled by Eric. Although those commercial movies limited the space for actors to perform, it was definitely an excellent opportunity to gain popularity. Therefore, even if it was a supporting role in these movies, many less famous second and third-tier actors would fight over it. Hearing Nicole's words, Paula did not hesitate. "Then it's settled." "Of course." Nicole smiled and whispered in Paula's ear, "Let me tell you a secret. Don't tell anyone. You know about Jurassic Park, right?" She nodded. It was impossible for her not to know about this. Eric said that the actors in this movie can only get the lowest salary set by the union. "So, do you understand?" Nicole said and raised her eyebrows at Paula. Paula's eyes flashed. She quickly understood. The actors could only get the lowest salary set by the union. This was a measure that many famous directors often took to save money. However, there were very few directors in Hollywood who dared to make such a request. Eric certainly had the right to do so now. However, since he had made such a request, unless it was to compete for the Oscars, the most popular Hollywood stars would not easily consider joining a movie. Therefore, the opportunity was left to the second-rate and third-rate actors. Most of the popular stars in Hollywood already had a stable team of agents. In Parker Kingsley's plan, she wanted to sign actors who were second or third tier, but had great potential. If Nicole told her the inside story in advance, Parker Kingsley would be able to prepare ahead of her management company. She might even be able to get a few roles in Jurassic Park. "Thank you, Nicole." Paula almost hugged Nicole and kissed her. She even made up her mind to temporarily put aside the matter of asking for compensation from crews. She wanted to get the contracts of the actors' agents as soon as possible and focus on fighting for the roles in Jurassic Park. After parting with Paula, Nicole got into the car and sat in the driver's seat. She was a little excited. The three women of TG Film formed a small circle around Eric. Of course, she was not willing to be alone. Now she had taken the first step, hadn't she? Since Paula Wagner has given up the position, I will do it myself, Eric said after hearing the news from Nicole. When Catherine Bigelow was shooting Point Shock, Eric had already been a producer once. In fact, the job of a producer was not as mysterious as ordinary people thought. Most of the time, a producer was like a silk thread that perfectly connected all aspects of film production. This job was complicated and required strong control, but it did not involve too many things. Moreover, unlike those independent producers in Hollywood who needed to do everything by themselves, in Eric's position he only needed to say a few words and someone would get things done. When Disney and Columbia, who were collaborating on the development of Mr. and Mrs. Smith, learned that Eric would be the producer himself, of course they agreed. Without going through a long project incubation period, Mr. and Mrs. Smith quickly entered the stage where the script was set and the funds were sufficient. Several teams also began the early stages of the movie according to the requirements of the script. As for the director, Firefly's invitation through Jia quickly reached Wu Beige. Although it was not a big deal for Hollywood, the news that Wu Beige had accepted Hollywood's invitation to direct a movie caused a sensation in Southeast Asia. The local newspapers reported the news on the front page for several days. Hollywood had always been the dream of Hong Kong filmmakers, or rather, the world's filmmakers. Because of the racial advantage, it was much easier for Western filmmakers to join Hollywood than for Eastern filmmakers. Therefore, every Eastern filmmaker who could make a name for himself in Hollywood would be warmly welcomed by the locals. Therefore, this matter became surprisingly smooth. After Wu Beige accepted the invitation, she arrived in Los Angeles in mid-March. Because of the importance of this opportunity, although there were not many boxing scenes in the movie, Wu Beige still brought a team of martial arts directors with her at her own expense. Firefly's studio in Playa Vista was very close to the Los Angeles International Airport. After Wu Beige got off the plane, Eric asked someone to bring her directly here. "Hello, Mr. Wu. Welcome to Los Angeles." At the entrance of the studio, Eric shook hands with Wu Beige and greeted her with a smile. "Hello, Mr. Williams. It's an honor to meet you too. I like your movie very much," Wu Beige said politely. Hong Kong was still a British colony. Even if many people in Hong Kong did not speak Mandarin, most of them had no problem speaking English. "Thank you. Let me introduce you. This is Mr. Stan Winston. He is a very outstanding special effects artist, and also the CEO of Digital Domain Special Effects Company. This is Robert Huggins, the Vice President of Columbia Pictures. This is the female lead of Mr. and Mrs. Smith, Miss Nicole Kidman. This is my assistant, Alan Fissman." Eric introduced them one by one. Wu Beige shook hands with each of them one by one. After the introduction, Wu Beige thought about it and decided not to introduce her entourage. Compared to these Hollywood moguls, she was only a small figure. Although the martial arts director she brought was from the Yuan family troupe in Hong Kong, they were not presentable. However, Eric was very considerate and asked about it. Wu Beige then briefly introduced them. After chatting for a while, Eric led Wu Beige and the others into the studio. As soon as they walked into the park, everyone, including Wu Beige, was surprised. Compared to the simple set in Hong Kong, the studio here could only be described as magnificent. Back then, Eric had demarcated 100 hectares of land in Playa Vista. In addition to the studio, there were a lot of supporting buildings and facilities. Now the fixed number of employees in the studio base had exceeded 200, and that was not including the employees in Digital Domain. What we see are just the regular studios. In addition, there are 2 virtual digital studios dedicated to shooting special effects scenes that are under construction. They are expected to be operational next year. Eric personally led Wu Beige and the others around before entering the office of the administrative building. At this time, only Nicole, Wu Beige, and the two assistant producers of Mr. and Mrs. Smith were left with him. The vice president of Columbia left after showing his face. Stan Winston just happened to be there. After greeting them, he returned to the office of Digital Domain to continue working. Although the special effects work on Tornado had been completed and the Jurassic Park project had not been launched, since Terminator 2 last year, Digital Domain had been busy with special effects film projects. The assistants brought by Wu Beige were taken to their accommodation in advance by Alan. "Mr. Wu, I have an empty villa in Beverly Hills. You can stay there for the time being during the filming. If you need anything else, you can call my assistant. Of course, you can also look for me directly." Wu Beige was obviously flattered. Before she came, she had received some information about Eric from Mr. Zhou. She had also heard of some cases of discrimination against outsiders in Hollywood. Wu Beige even felt a little uneasy about Eric's courtesy. "Thank you, Mr. Williams, but let's talk about the movie." "Of course." Eric nodded with a smile. He also understood Wu Beige's personal feelings. However, after a few years, he finally met a colleague on the other side. Although this colleague's reputation in China was not very good in the original spacetime, it did not hinder his natural closeness. Moreover, Heroes was destined to be a classic memory of his generation. He handed a complete script of Mr. and Mrs. Smith to Wu Beige. Due to the need to keep it confidential, Wu Beige only read a simple outline of the story in Hong Kong. Seeing Wu Beige open the script, Eric said, "Mr. Wu, you can read the script in private. Let's talk about the production idea of this movie first. You've already read the outline of the story. Can you tell me your thoughts first?" "Okay," Wu Beige said. She took out some documents that she had prepared long ago from her briefcase and handed one to Eric. She said, "These are some of my thoughts. Mr. Williams, you can take a look first." Eric flipped through it and found that there was not much text in the document. Most of it was just sketches for different scenes. However, because he had a ready-made movie in his mind, Eric quickly recognized the scenes involved in these sketches. "According to my humble opinion, although this Mr. and Mrs. Smith is an action movie, it is a metaphor for the marriage between a man and a woman. Therefore, during the shooting process, I hope to use some external settings to hint at this point. For example, the villa where the two of them live. I hope to use a simple and cold style to symbolize the estrangement between the male and female leads. When this villa is finally blown up, it also means that the estrangement between the male and female leads will disappear. The emotional turning point of the male and female leads in the movie will also start from the scene of the villa being blown up." Chapter 461. Nicole quietly listened to Eric and Wu Beige's conversation. Although it was Wu Beige who was speaking most of the time, Nicole quickly understood from Eric's occasional, "This won't do. I think we can do it that way." And so on. Eric was still in control of the rhythm of the conversation, and this made her completely relieved. Although Nicole had only been in Hollywood for 2 or 3 years, with the rise of her fame and status, Nicole had already regarded herself as a member of Hollywood. Therefore, like many others, she instinctively distrusted outsiders who had just entered Hollywood. If this project had nothing to do with Eric, and the producer insisted on using a Hong Kong director, she would have taken the initiative to withdraw from the crew. Time ticked by, and when the sky outside the window gradually darkened, Eric, who was satisfied, said, "Mr. Wu, let's call it a day. I'm very happy that we coincided with each other on many shooting ideas. I believe that our cooperation will be very pleasant in the future." Wu Beige also stood up with a smile. "I hope so too." Although many of his shooting ideas had been rejected by Eric, the current situation was much better than he had imagined. At least, Eric personally promised that as long as the two sides reached an agreement on the shooting concept before the shooting began, he would have enough power during the shooting process. This was what Wu Beige wanted most. After all, in Hollywood, most of the time, the director was just a wage earner who was one level higher than the others in the crew. Especially in those big movies, the director would not only be constrained by the producer, but also have to accommodate the famous actors. Wu Beige absolutely had no doubt that his power in the crew would be reduced in the future by Eric. After all, although the young man opposite him was young, he was one of the most powerful people in Hollywood. They walked out of the conference room side by side. When they passed through the corridor, several people, including Nicole, fell behind. Eric said to Wu Beige, who was next to him, "Mr. Wu, you must have done a full understanding of Hollywood before coming here." Wu Beige nodded. He didn't know that Eric would suddenly mention this. Eric went on to say, "I know that there are many excellent filmmakers in Hong Kong, but Hollywood is very xenophobic, and the exclusion of people of color will be even more obvious. When you shoot in the future, you will definitely encounter this." Wu Beige was not like the native people of America, who had suffered all kinds of hidden discrimination all year round. Of course, he couldn't understand the deeper meaning of Eric's words. He just said, "Don't worry, Mr. Williams. If this happens, I will focus on the overall situation." "No, it's useless to be patient." Eric shook his head and said, "If you want to get the recognition of Hollywood, the only way is to bring enough benefits to the producers. As long as you can make the film company make money, they will treat you as a distinguished guest, whether you are yellow or black. I will try my best." Although Wu Beige said so, there was some lack of confidence in his tone. Any movie was an investment gamble. Who could be sure that it would win? "I've seen many of your movies, including True Colors of Heroes, Bloodthirsty Heroes, Brave Heroes, and last year's Traversing the Four Seas. This is also the reason why you received this movie contract. However, the reason why I rejected many of your ideas is because they may be suitable for Hong Kong movies across the ocean, but they won't work in Hollywood. So, although I will give you enough power after we reach an agreement, I also hope that you can maintain your own shooting style and be more compliant with the rules of Hollywood. You also know my identity. I can bear the success or failure of a movie, but you can't." Of course, Wu Beige could hear that Eric said these words out of kindness. Although he didn't know why the young Hollywood mogul was so kind when they met for the first time, this didn't stop Wu Beige from being grateful. "Mr. Williams, don't worry. I will never betray your trust." Eric smiled and said nothing more. As a fan of shoot-'em-up movies in his previous life, he reminded Wu Beige of this. However, now the positions of the two sides were as different as heaven and earth. If Wu Beige really screwed up Mr. and Mrs. Smith, then he could only obediently return to Hong Kong. However, because of the lack of time in this life, Wu Beige didn't say bold words such as, not returning to Hong Kong to make movies. Even if he went back, he wouldn't have any psychological burden. After the director was in place, the next step was to choose the male lead. The male and female leads in Mr. and Mrs. Smith accounted for 80% of the total length of the movie. Therefore, in addition to being handsome, the male lead also needed to have enough acting skills and charisma. Because it was a script written by Eric himself and he was also the producer. As long as the A-list male stars in Hollywood had the time and met the conditions, they basically expressed their intention to participate. Even many second and third-tier male stars with more connections contacted Eric himself through various kinds of connections. "Eric, I think Mel Gibson is good. He is the male lead of Lethal Weapon 3 in the summer season. He can definitely play a role in promoting the box office of Mr. and Mrs. Smith," Peter Guber said during the discussion about the male lead. The age limit of the male lead in Mr. and Mrs. Smith was between 30 and 40 years old. Hollywood male stars had a very long shelf life. Male stars at this age were often the most masculine stage. Eric listened to Peter Guber's words and lowered his head to flip through the information in front of him. So far, the candidates selected by the crew included Mel Gibson, Bruce Willis, Liam Neeson, Kevin Costner, and so on. Even Sylvester Stallone's agent had sent over an audition application. After the box office fiasco of Rocky V, Stallone's career had been in a slump for the past 2 years. Although the other party's agent directly called Eric and offered very sincere conditions, Eric quickly rejected it. Stallone was an action star, but that poker face would definitely be a disaster for a slightly comedic action film. "No, Peter, Mel Gibson is not good. He gives off too much of a wild and unruly feeling. The male lead I want should be sexy with a hint of gentlemanly demeanor. Mel Gibson is not a gentleman. Eric said, shaking his head. Although Mel Gibson was infamous for his anti-Semitic remarks in the original film, this had nothing to do with Eric. In Hollywood, it was difficult for people with moral cleanliness to survive. He simply felt that Mel Gibson was not suitable. What about Bruce Willis? Peter Guber mentioned another heavyweight male star, Bruce Willis, who was at the peak of his career due to his many action movies. Eric raised his head helplessly and said, "Peter, what we need is a suitable male lead, not just their box office appeal. If you let Bruce Willis replace Schwarzenegger as the Terminator, or let Mel Gibson act in Die Hard, Dragon, do you think those two movies will still be successful?" Peter Guber waved his hand and said, "Okay, Eric, then you have to have a candidate. We have been discussing this for a week. We can't just waste time like this." Eric tidied up the documents in front of him, stood up and said, "That's all for today. I will go back and think about it. I will arrange an audition in the next 2 days. If it doesn't work, we will expand the scope of the audition." Back at the Sharp Corner Manor, just as Eric got out of the car, he saw a red Ferrari driving through the manor's corridor. When it passed by Eric, there was a slight breeze. After the Ferrari stopped, the tall girl in a tight black leather suit did not immediately get out of the car. She leaned over the steering wheel, took off her aviator sunglasses, and gave Eric a charming smile. "Hey dear, don't you recognize me?" Eric smiled and shook his head. Looking at Famke Johnson, who was smiling with a hint of wildness, Eric felt a flash of inspiration, but he could not grasp it. Famke Johnson did not know what Eric was thinking. She opened the door and got out of the car. She came over and held Eric's arm and said, "Let's go. What are you standing here for?" "Don't I think? Let me think." Famke Johnson stopped and looked at Eric in puzzlement as he waited patiently. "Forget it. Let's go." After a while, Eric gave up struggling and pulled Famke Johnson towards the villa. "Why are you here today? The Oscars are coming up. Don't you need to attend the PR party? What's the point of attending the party if I'm not nominated?" Famke Johnson said helplessly. Flowers at the End of the Line had received multiple Oscars nominations. However, in the original Spacetime, the situation where both female leads were nominated did not happen. Famke Johnson had originally wanted to fight for a female lead nomination to boost her popularity, but TG had only nominated Susan Sutherland for Best Actress. They even said that she was just a newcomer, and even if she was nominated, she might not necessarily be nominated. It would also be a waste of TG's PR resources. Of course, Famke Johnson knew that Elizabeth and the others were playing tricks. If not for Eric personally asking, she would not have been able to get the role in Flowers at the End of the Line. However, Famke Johnson could not be bothered to tell Eric about this. However, seeing Famke Johnson's sullen expression, Eric could roughly guess what had happened. "Your performance in Flowers at the End of the Line was still very outstanding. I'll talk to them later. How can they be like this? TSK, can you bear 2? That's 3. Famke Johnson said mockingly. Eric hugged Famke Johnson's waist and said seriously, "In my heart, all of you are unique. No one is more important than the other. You're really shameless." Oh, Famke Johnson was just about to continue when Eric kissed her on the lips. After kissing for a while, Famke Johnson felt one of Eric's hands slowly slide down from her waist. Famke Johnson hurriedly pushed Eric away. "No, we're outside." "Then let's go back to the villa. I'll personally cook for you tonight. How about that?" "It seems. I'm not looking forward to it at all." Famke Johnson laughed. Eric's culinary skills were only average. Furthermore, the habits from his previous life made the food that Eric made not to the taste of the women around him. Eric revealed a look of dissatisfaction. "Hey, that's too inconsiderate. I've been busy all day, and now I'm back to cook for you. Shouldn't you at least praise me a little?" "Forget it. I'll make dinner," Famke Johnson said. "Then let's do it together." The two chatted and laughed as they walked into the villa. After dinner, Eric went into the study with Famke Johnson following behind him. "It's been a while since I've seen this wall of yours." Famke Johnson walked along the wall that was covered in drafts with his hands behind his back. From time to time he would reach out to take down a draft and scrutinize it before carefully pasting it back. Eric replied softly. He sat at the desk and flipped through the list of male actors that he had brought back. He held a pencil in his hand and occasionally took notes. For many Hollywood movies, the longest delay was usually the script. Many movie scripts had to go through multiple revisions. However, Mr. and Mrs. Smith had directly passed this most difficult hurdle. Furthermore, with the green light from the two major movie companies, the movie's preparation could be said to be extremely fast. Now, as long as they could choose the male lead, the crew could enter the early stages of breaking in. Famke Johnson walked around the study and finally came to Eric's desk. He reached out and gently leaped onto the wide desk. He took out a pencil and a paper cutter from the pen holder in front of Eric. He pulled the ashtray over and carefully sharpened the pencil. "Hey, why do you always use a pencil?" Famke Johnson asked curiously after he finished sharpening a pencil and fiddled with it. Eric smelled the faint body fragrance of the girl beside him and said nonchalantly, "Habit. It makes me stand out from the masses. Occasionally, I can use it to pick up girls. Look, I've hooked another one." Famke Johnson was taken aback for a moment before he quickly understood. He smiled and raised his long leg to kick Eric. "Can't you be a little more serious? Being serious is just a habit. Nothing else." Eric smiled and placed a document to the side. He turned around in his leather chair and looked at the girl. "All right, seeing how you're hesitating to speak, tell me, what's the matter?" Famke Johnson hesitated for a moment before saying in embarrassment, "Did you start another movie recently?" "Brad Pitt?" Eric asked with a faint smile. "All right, you've guessed it. He treated me to dinner yesterday." As Famke Johnson spoke, he noticed Eric's expression and quickly explained, "It was with his agent. You scared him out of his wits. He didn't dare to be alone with me." Of course, it wasn't that Eric hadn't thought of the original male lead of Mr. and Mrs. Smith. However, even if he disregarded the past and agreed, Fox, who owned half of the rights to The X-Files, would firmly oppose it. After all, if Pitt became popular with this movie, how could The X-Files continue filming? Chapter 462. Brad Pitt definitely can't do it. Although his schedule is barely enough, even if I agree, Fox will definitely do everything possible to stop this. The X-Files is one of Fox's trump cards, Eric said, then laughed and said, "I suddenly understand why Liz and the others didn't fight for you to be nominated for an Oscar." Famke Johnson showed a look of realization and said, "I understand too." In addition to the little schemes between women, Fox, who was in charge of the distribution of flowers at the end of the road, was also secretly working to minimize the influence of Famke Johnson's role in Flowers at the End of the Road, to ensure that there would be no changes to the female lead of The X-Files. For a TV series that had accumulated widespread popularity, a sudden change in the male and female leads would have a huge impact on the ratings. In the original space-time, the withdrawal of the male lead, David Duchovny, directly led to the end of the American TV series. Eric noticed that Famke Johnson's expression was a little gloomy and asked, "Are you regretting taking on this TV series?" Regret? Famke Johnson had indeed just experienced such emotions. Like Brad Pitt, she had signed a contract for 5 X-Files movies in advance. In other words, to regain her freedom, she would need to film for at least another 3 years. But 3 years later, if Fox felt that the X-Files could still continue filming, what should she choose? For many TV series actors who had been set in stone by the small screen, it was very difficult to make the decision to start from scratch and enter the big screen when they clearly had a popular TV series to maintain their popularity. And to juggle both, acting in a TV series and breaking into the big screen at the same time, was not very possible. TV series producers often did not give them this opportunity, unless the actor had strong support behind him. Thinking of this, Famke Johnson could not help but look at Eric and suddenly smiled with relief. If it were not for this man, perhaps she would still be a small actress struggling at the bottom of Hollywood. Her day of success would be far away, or perhaps she would never be successful. He had already given her so much. What more could she ask for? Eric had been paying attention to the changes in Farmick Johnson's expression the entire time. When he saw her smile, he said, "I've thought it through." "That's right." Farmick Johnson lowered his head and stared at Eric. He gently swung his legs and kicked off his shoes. Eric reached out to press down on the two restless calves. Looking up, Farmick Johnson's two straight legs appeared even more slender. "Are you trying to seduce me?" "That's right." "So, what are you waiting for?" Farmick Johnson said as he leaned back with both hands on the table. Just as Eric was about to take action, he looked at Farmick Johnson and suddenly had an idea. "I got it." Farmick Johnson subconsciously looked at Eric. "What?" Eric revealed an excited expression and said, "The male lead of Mr. and Mrs. Smith. I remember who's the most suitable." "Aya, why didn't I think of it earlier? This person is the most suitable." "At this time, you're actually thinking of someone else, and a man. Don't you think that's very hurtful?" Farmick Johnson was a little angry as he lightly kicked Eric's calf. "Oh, sorry, baby. I was wrong." Eric hurriedly smiled and kissed the girl's cheek, temporarily ignoring the topic. In the conference room, Peter Guber's assistant, Chong Peters, waved the documents in his hands and said almost hysterically, "Pierce Brosnan? Eric, are you kidding? This guy used to be a TV actor, and he's only acted in a few low-budget movies. How can such a person have box office appeal? Don't forget, we're talking about a $60 million budget movie. $60 million. Mr. Peters, can you calm down?" Eric looked at the grumpy middle-aged man sitting across the conference table with some disgust. If possible, he also wanted to follow Spielberg's example and add a clause to the contract forbidding Chong Peters from participating in the meeting. However, the situation now was very different from before. Eric could not intervene in Columbia's internal affairs. Peter Guber, who was sitting next to Chong Peters, secretly tugged at him. Chong Peters finally calmed down. Although he realized that he had lost his composure, Chong Peters had no intention of apologizing. He leaned back in his chair like a rascal and crossed his arms, looking like he did not intend to cooperate. Eric, who was about to explain why he had hired Pierce Brosnan, lost his patience when he saw Chong Peters' reaction. He said coldly, "Mr. Peters, if you don't have confidence in Mr. and Mrs. Smith, you can withdraw now. If this movie fails in the future, I promise you won't take any responsibility." Since he became the president of Columbia, very few people spoke to him in such a tone. Even the executives of Sony were polite to him. Chong Peters almost lost his temper when he heard Eric's reprimanding tone. Fortunately, he still had some rationality. Eric's status in Hollywood was not lower than his. Moreover, if he cut ties with Mr. and Mrs. Smith, as Eric said, he would not take any responsibility if the movie failed. But if the movie succeeded, he would not take any credit. These things could never be separated. Chong Peters was silent for a moment. Finally, he lowered his voice and said reluctantly, "Mr. Williams, I only hope you understand what you are doing." "Thank you for your reminder," Eric replied calmly. He turned his head and said something to the person beside him. The person took out a videotape, stood up, and walked to the projector in front of the conference room. "This is Pierce Brosnan's audition tape. Everyone can take a look first." As Eric spoke, the staff member had already put the videotape into the projector. In the simple audition room, there was a dining table. Nicole was holding a glass of champagne in her hand. She sat alone at the dining table, looking a little lonely. A drop of tear overflowed from the corner of her eye. Nicole wiped it with her hand and took a deep breath, as if trying to dispel the sadness in her heart. Just then, a hand gently grabbed the glass that Nicole had raised and refilled it with some champagne. Nicole seemed to realize something. She lowered her head and smiled. She seemed to be choking with sobs. Everyone present was attracted by Nicole's acting skills and charm. At the same time, they were a little curious about the performance of the male lead. I thought of something to say for this moment." The man who was pouring the wine finally appeared in the camera. He was wearing a neat suit, had a handsome square face, and had a cynical smile on his face. "I think I should suddenly appear and say, 'Baby, thank you for your gift.'" If all the men in the conference room had been captivated by Nicole's performance, Pierce Brosnan's elegant entrance had captured the eyes of all the women present in just a few seconds. Very good. So what's your decision? Nicole looked up and smiled at the man beside her. I want to divorce you, Pierce Brosnan said. He walked to the opposite side of the table and pulled out a chair. He asked politely, May I sit down? No, Nicole replied. Pierce Brosnan didn't seem to hear Nicole's words. He sat down and reached into his suit with one hand. He took out a pistol and covered his knee with a napkin. At the same time, Nicole also took a defensive stance. The camera returned to their faces. At that moment, everyone in the conference room could almost feel the sparks between a man and a woman across the table. The audition ended when Pierce Brosnan pulled Nicole to the dance floor. After the video ended, everyone in the conference room fell into a brief silence. Although he didn't say it out loud, Katzenberg, who had come from Disney to participate in the project discussion, had the same thoughts as the two men from Columbia. He also felt that Eric's choice of the male lead was a little hasty. However, Katzenberg wasn't like the two men from Columbia, who were simply obsessed with the box office appeal of an A-list superstar, and ignored other factors. After watching the audition, Katzenberg also realized that Pierce Brosnan was almost invulnerable. Noticing the awkward silence in the conference room, Katzenberg knew that he had to do something, so he gently clapped his hands. After the silence was broken, the others in the conference room also applauded. Eric nodded at Katzenberg with a smile. Although he could make all the decisions by force, if he gained the approval of others, the production of the movie would be much smoother. Now that Katzenberg had taken the lead in applauding, even if the others didn't agree with him, they would feel less resentful because of the herd mentality. Pierce Brosnan was almost decided. Speaking of Pierce Brosnan, Eric couldn't help but think of the night a few days ago. He couldn't help but smile. If it weren't for Famke Janssen's accidental action, he wouldn't have remembered the fifth-generation 007 actor in the original universe. In Pierce Brosnan's first 007 movie, Famke Janssen played the role of the villain. Furthermore, Famke Janssen played the role of a Soviet female killer. She used her long and slender legs to squeeze men until they suffocated to death. Although Pierce Brosnan was not very famous now, Eric was very optimistic about the future of Mr. and Mrs. Smith. In the original Spacetime, Pierce Brosnan, who was also not very famous, starred in the first 007 movie. The box office was twice as high as the previous one, and 007 was very similar to the setting of John Smith in Mr. and Mrs. Smith. After the applause, Eric said, "Since no one has any objections, the male lead has been confirmed as Pierce Brosnan. Let's discuss other issues." After the male lead was confirmed, the three most important main creators of Mr. and Mrs. Smith were finalized. The project began to progress quickly. A few days before the Oscars, Disney and Columbia held a press conference for Mr. and Mrs. Smith. Although the press conference was very lively, the crew didn't reveal much other than introducing the main creators of the movie. The only thing that could be used for speculation was the movie poster that was revealed at the press conference. On the poster, Nicole and Pierce Brosnan stood with their backs facing each other. Nicole's exposed thigh had a small exquisite pistol, and Pierce Brosnan was holding the famous Desert Eagle. On the second day of the press conference, there were all kinds of speculations about Mr. and Mrs. Smith in the newspapers. Most of the newspapers were inclined to think that this was another romance film that Eric was good at. Although the gun was shown on the poster, it didn't stop people from speculating. After all, although Eric's movies didn't have a fixed style, so far, the most successful and famous ones were the two romance films, Pretty Woman and Ghost. Moreover, the title of Mr. and Mrs. Smith seemed to imply this. However, not everyone was inclined to this point of view. Some of the media quickly focused their attention on the unfamiliar Hong Kong director, Wu Beige. After some investigation, the media also found that Wu Beige was most famous in Hong Kong for directing gunfights, and the movie poster happened to show a pistol. Then, the theme of the movie seemed to be self-evident. Regarding the speculation and debate in the media, whether it was Disney or Columbia, they didn't have any intention of explaining. This was because many senior executives of Hollywood film companies knew that the success or failure of a movie, especially a commercial movie, was closely related to the movie's popularity among the media and the public, in addition to the quality of the movie itself. For many movies, the better the movie's reputation, the higher the box office wouldn't be. Instead, the more popular the movie was among the audience, the better the movie's box office would be, regardless of whether the topic was positive or negative. Therefore, in a situation where the public had a strong interest in the movie, the best way was to remain silent and let the media discuss it. Unable to get any information from the film company, the two male and female leads of the movie had become the targets of the paparazzi. Of course, the paparazzi had no intention of letting Wu Beige go. After such a heated discussion for a while, Nicole and Pierce Brosnan quickly moved into the special agent school, specially set up for Hollywood actors according to the arrangements of the crew. They learned how to use the various guns involved in the movie, and the crew of Mr. and Mrs. Smith was quickly formed. Chapter 463. Eric, even if you're not attending the Oscars, you can't leave Los Angeles at this time. There's a Firefly Pictures theme party after the Oscars. This is Firefly's first time. In the pointy corner manner, Drew lazily looked at the two people who were packing their luggage. Tina Fey was helping Eric fold his clothes. When she heard Drew's words, she raised her head and glanced at Eric, who was taking his clothes out of the wardrobe. She was Drew's assistant now. She was basically inseparable from Drew. She even lived with Drew. Drew wanted to send Eric out of Los Angeles, so she followed along. Eric passed a suit to Tina Fey and said, "Michael and the rest will take care of this. Why don't I go with you?" Drew propped himself up and said expectantly, "I'm not going out to play, so you should stay in Los Angeles obediently. Don't cause trouble for me." Drew snorted softly with dissatisfaction. He went over to Eric's luggage and helped him fold the clothes. Looking at Tina Fey, who was wearing black-rimmed glasses, Drew suddenly said, "Why don't you let Tina go with you? I don't have much to do during this time anyway." When Tina Fey heard this, a trace of anticipation flashed through her heart. She stole a glance at Eric's silhouette, but very soon, she shook her head without confidence and said, "I'm not going. I don't know anything." "I don't need you to know anything." Drew went over to Tina Fey's ear as if he was whispering secretly, but he didn't lower his voice at all. "With you by Eric's side, he won't mess with other women." Tina Fey instantly understood what Drew meant, and her face turned red. Eric took out the last few clothes and passed them to Tina Fey. He knocked Drew's head and said, "Don't talk nonsense. Also, when I'm not around, don't do anything stupid in the manner." Drew covered his head and cried out, dragging out his voice in dissatisfaction, "I know." After packing his luggage, Eric refused Drew's offer to send him. He took Alan and 4 bodyguards to the Los Angeles airport and boarded a small Boeing private jet. The passenger plane was originally leased by Disney for the use of executives. After Disney was acquired by Firefly, the right to use the passenger plane was also changed to Firefly. After the plane took off, Eric asked Alan to take out the information and went to a lounge in the airport alone. He sat at the desk by the window and opened the folder in his hand. After Chris returned to New York, according to Eric's previous instructions, Firefly Investment began to pay attention to and collect information about computer and network-related industries. A few days ago, he sent some of the investment projects he had his eyes on to Eric. Among the large pile of information, one company caught Eric's attention. This was also the reason why he rushed to New York. This company was called America Online AOL. It was the AOL that merged with Time Warner Corporation in 2000. In his previous life, Eric was just 25 years old. He had just graduated from university a few years ago. He was at the age where he was full of ambition. Therefore, like many other young people, he was very concerned about this merger that involved $180 billion. At that time, the market value of the AOL Time Warner Corporation after the merger was worth more than $8 billion. Eric remembered very clearly that back then, someone made a comparison. In the year 2000, the mainland's GDP was only 9 trillion renminbi, which was equivalent to $1.3 billion. In other words, The AOL Time Warner Corporation's market value at its peak was 26% of the mainland's GDP. Now, the information in his hands showed that although AOL had been established for 7 years, it was only an inconspicuous internet service provider in Virginia. The company's valuation was only $200 to $300 million US. It had 120 employees and 150,000 users. Its market share was only 10% of the internet service market. After Eric carefully read the thin information in his hands a few times, the plane landed at JFK Airport. Eric, over here. Walking out of the airport lobby, Eric saw Chris in a long black trench coat waving at him. Although it was already the end of March, the temperature in New York was still about 10 degrees. Eric, who only wore a thin jacket in Los Angeles, had no choice but to put on a trench coat. "Chris, how have you been?" Eric and Chris hugged and exchanged pleasantries. "Not bad. Oh, this is Mr. Steve Keys." Chris nodded, and then introduced the middle-aged man beside him to Eric. Eric had read Steve Keys's information many times. Steve Keys was the founder of AOL. He wore a khaki trench coat, had a round face, and looked a little shy. "Mr. Williams, nice to meet you. I like your movies very much." Steve Keys took the initiative to reach out to Eric and complimented him. Although he had accumulated hundreds of millions of dollars from scratch, he still paled in comparison to Eric. Eric smiled and shook hands with him. He then introduced his entourage to him before they got in the car and returned to Manhattan. Eric and Chris got in the car. After the car started, he asked, "How's your talk with him?" Chris shook his head and said, "It's not done yet. He hasn't completely given up on the listing plan, but he promised to talk to you." Eric breathed a sigh of relief. When Chris collected the information about AOL, the other party had been preparing for the listing for half a year. However, in Eric's view, now was not the best time for AOL to be listed. "It's fine as long as we can talk." Chris looked at his watch. Eric left Los Angeles at 9 o'clock in the morning. According to the 4-hour time difference between the East and West, it was now 9 o'clock in New York. "By the way, should I send you back to your place first, or go directly to the company?" If Steve Keys did not come to pick him up, Eric did not mind going back to his apartment in Manhattan first. "Let's go to the company." "Okay then." Chris said to the driver and said, "Come to my place for dinner tonight. Emily will cook." "Sure." Eric nodded without hesitation. He didn't notice the guilt and awkwardness that flashed across Chris's eyes when he said that. If you don't pay attention to user experience, no matter how advanced a company's technology is, it will often be eliminated by the market. Therefore, AOL's business strategy is to put users first. Every quarter, we will collect statistics on all user satisfaction and collect user suggestions to improve. In the conference room of Firefly Investment, Steve Keys explained his business philosophy with passion. After Firefly Investment contacted him, Steve Keys had already thought of introducing Firefly's investment funds. After all, if AOL chose to be listed, it would have to accept a lot of supervision, which would definitely limit the development of a company to a certain extent. However, the reason why he hadn't relented until now, and even proposed to meet with Eric, the owner of Firefly's investment, was nothing more than waiting for the right price. He wanted to get more benefits from Firefly. "Mr. Keys, I heard that you are more inclined to let AOL be listed, right?" Eric waited for the other party to finish his speech before he asked. Steve Keys nodded without hesitation. "Yes, if we choose to be listed, it will be easier for AOL to draw development funds from the capital market. In our development plan, AOL's thirst for funds is very high." Eric smiled. If Steve Keys insisted on being listed, he would not be here today. However, it was something that everyone knew, so there was no need to expose it in front of him. "I don't object to the listing of AOL," Eric said. "However, I don't think it's the best time to be listed." Steve Keys showed a puzzled look. Eric said, "If you pay more attention to current affairs, you should have noticed the recent election speeches of the Prestige Party's presidential candidate, William Clinton. He proposed an information superhighway plan." "I did hear some of it." Steve Keys nodded. "However, although I support some of Clinton's ideas, I don't think he has a high chance of winning. Last year's victory in the Gulf War brought President Bush a lot of prestige, and Clinton's prestige party is also in a state of disunity. If Clinton can't be elected president, many of his governing ideas are just empty words. You can't say that. The reason why Clinton proposed the Information Superhighway Plan is precisely because his campaign saw the development prospects of computer networks. I think this is an irreversible trend of the times. Even if Clinton loses the election and President Bush is re-elected, this trend can't be changed. Therefore, it is very unwise for AOL to be listed so early. Mr. Williams, although I am also very confident in the popularization of computer networks, but $60 million US. What? Steve Case was taken aback as he asked with uncertainty. Eric said, I know that AOL intends to sell 30% of its shares this time and plans to raise $5,000 US. I can offer $60 million. Moreover, in the next few years, if AOL is short of funds, Firefly can still invest. Hearing Eric directly start to quote, Steve Keyes said, Mr. Williams, $60 million US seems to be a little less. Although our company's plan is to raise $50 million US, if the market responds well, the scale of financing will definitely be more than that. Very good. Eric smiled. It seems that you have agreed to talk to Firefly about the capital injection. Then the specific amount can be negotiated by our teams. Steve Keyes was stunned and quickly realized that Eric had led him into a ditch. Mr. Williams, I was just talking about a possibility. I didn't agree. It's okay, then let's continue the discussion. Eric sat up straight, the smile on his face still unchanged. At this time, Chris also smiled and interrupted. Mr. Keyes, Eric not only has to manage Firefly Pictures, but he also has a few movies to manage. Moreover, the Oscars are in a few days. You said that you wanted to talk face to face. He canceled the Oscars ceremony and came to New York specifically. So, you should be able to see that we are very sincere. Okay. Steve Keyes also felt that if he continued to be pretentious, he might end up making a fool of himself. He said, however, regarding the scale of Firefly's capital injection and the management rights of the organization, I have some conditions of my own. Please say. Chris stretched out his hand. First of all, Firefly can't interfere with the daily management of AOL. You can rest assured on this, Chris replied. You should know that Firefly Investment is currently the largest shareholder of Cisco. But except for the more important company matters, we don't interfere with the management of Cisco. Steve Keyes obviously knew about this matter. He nodded and said, another thing, I hope that Firefly can hand over the voting rights of its shares to me. Hearing this condition, Chris looked at Eric. Not interfering with the daily management of AOL and transferring the voting rights of the shares were two different things. If they gave up the voting rights, it meant that Firefly completely lost the power to control the direction of AOL. Steve Keyes could do whatever he wanted. Eric quickly thought about it, then raised 3 fingers and said, 3 years. Within 3 years, Firefly will hand over the voting rights of its shares to you. 3 years is too short. At least 5 years, Steve Keyes bargained. No, 5 years is too long. Eric shook his head. At most 3 years. Also, I hope that AOL will choose to go public in 3 years. 3 years later it would be 1995. At that time, it would be the beginning of the Internet explosion, and also the beginning of the Internet bubble. Because of the merger between AOL and Time Warner, Eric still paid a lot of attention to AOL. AOL's most glorious period was only 5 years after 1995. This was because AOL's main business was dial-up Internet service. After 2000, with the bursting of the Internet bubble and the popularization of broadband Internet access, AOL declined rapidly. Its market value shrank by more than 90% in just a few years. Therefore, Eric paid so much attention to AOL now because of its net worth in the 5 years between 1995 and 2000. After these 5 golden years, AOL would have no value. Steve, regarding the amount of capital injection, we can still talk about it. But within 3 years, I will never give in. Chapter 464. Eric and Steve Keys talked back and forth for the whole day. They didn't reach much agreement until it was time to get off work, so they could only continue the discussion the next day. Because Chris invited him to dinner at his house, after work, Eric sent his entourage away and got into Chris' car. I didn't expect that the number of internet users in North America has exceeded 1.5 million. I thought it would take a while, Eric said with some emotion after Chris started the car. He planned to wait for Clinton to take office before starting some of the projects in his plan. After seeing some data about AOL today, he still felt that the projects in his mind should be started sooner rather than later. Although 1.5 million was not comparable to the hundreds of millions of internet users in the future. In this era where personal computers were not yet widely available, it was already a very impressive number. Moreover, when the number of internet users was relatively small, they could make arrangements in advance. When the number of internet users exploded, it could even reach the level of setting industry standards. Eric vaguely remembered a saying. It seemed that the first-class companies set the standards, the second-rate companies relied on the brand, the third-rate companies sold the technology, and the fourth-rate companies made the products. These 4 sentences were like an industry pyramid. The higher the level of the pyramid, the higher the benefits. Take the smartphone in the original spacetime, for example, the 2 mobile phone manufacturers, Apple and Samsung, who had a full set of technical standards, divided 90% of the smartphone profits. The domestic mobile phone manufacturers that always clamored to beat Apple in terms of configuration could only get 1% of the profits because the chips they used were from the United States, the screens were from Japan, and the cameras were from South Korea. Occasionally, they would come up with a gimmick of austenitic 304 stainless steel. It turned out that it was just a common utensil material. Chris didn't know what Eric was thinking. When he heard Eric's words, he asked, "What are you waiting for?" "I have some ideas in mind. I originally planned to wait for the internet to develop for a while before implementing them. Now it seems that I don't have to wait. The sooner the better." Chris nodded and leaned against the side of the road to let a red BMW convertible pass by. He was obviously absent-minded. "You moved?" Eric looked at the road signs outside. He remembered that Chris and Emily still lived in Midtown Manhattan last time, but now they were almost at Central Park. "We bought an apartment on the Upper East Side some time ago. It's on 3rd Avenue and 72nd Street. Coincidentally, I also have a villa nearby. I bought it with Drew last year, but I haven't lived there yet," Eric said. Suddenly, he thought of something and asked, "Are you guys getting married?" Chris shook his head. "Emily wants to wait for another 2 years. She doesn't plan to get married before she's 30. Eric's mind was quite sharp. Chris, who had been quite talkative, had suddenly become much less talkative. He quickly guessed that it might have something to do with this dinner. Chris parked the car in the parking lot of a high-rise apartment. The 2 of them got into the elevator together, and soon arrived at the floor where Chris's new home was located. Emily, who was dressed at home, opened the door and hugged Eric warmly. "Eric, it's nice to see you again." "Me too." Eric let go of Emily and smiled. "But I didn't bring any red wine." "It's okay, please come in." Emily let Eric into the apartment. Not only did she considerately help Eric hang up his windbreaker, she also personally took a pair of slippers for Eric to change into. Eric thought that the 2 of them seemed to be a little abnormal. Although Emily had always been very cheerful and enthusiastic, she seemed to be a little overboard today. "Eric, take a seat first. Dinner will be ready soon," Emily said after pouring a cup of coffee for Eric. She then gave Chris a look. "Chris, can you come and help me?" Chris helplessly followed them into the kitchen. Eric just glanced in the direction of the kitchen and didn't express any more curiosity. Instead, he casually picked up the remote control on the coffee table and turned on the TV. Anyway, if the 2 of them had something to say, they would definitely say it later. In the kitchen, Emily put on a pair of thermal gloves and opened the oven to take a look. Then she closed the lid and asked in a low voice, "Did you tell him?" Chris spread out his hands. "This is too awkward. What do you want me to say?" "How is it awkward? This is a very normal thing." Emily glared at her boyfriend angrily. You just don't want to help me." If I didn't want to help you, I wouldn't have invited Eric over. You can say the rest yourself, Chris said as he picked up the kitchen knife and wanted to help Emily cut the onions. Emily angrily snatched the kitchen knife away. Okay, I'll say it myself. I don't need your help. I was really scared that night, especially when the farm tractor smashed into the TV screen. I really thought the TV was broken. Eric, how did you do that? During dinner, Emily asked excitedly as she recalled the trailer of Tornado released some time ago. It's just a simple visual effect. Eric briefly explained the principle without too much pride in his tone. After all, the current 3D movie effects could reach this level, and the visual effects would be even more shocking. However, the current 3D movie technology was not mature enough. Wearing the current 3D glasses for a long time would cause severe visual fatigue, so most of the 3D technology could only be used in short films. Emily asked expectantly, I remember that Tornado will be released on June 5th. That's still a long time. Will Firefly pre-screening it in advance? Of course. I'll get someone to send you 2 tickets then, Eric replied with a smile. Emily thanked him. Then the atmosphere in the dining room fell into a short pause. After a while, Emily finally mustered up the courage to ask, Eric, now that Firefly Investment Company still has a large sum of money, right? Eric looked at Chris, who lowered his head and pretended to drink his soup. He smiled and said, Chris should know more about this than I do, right? Chris choked when he heard this. He quickly pulled out a few tissues and turned around. Eric understood what was going on. He put down the knife and fork in his hand and said seriously, Emily, if you have something to say, just say it. We don't need to be so formal with each other. This will make us seem distant. Emily was a little embarrassed when she heard this. Actually, it's my family's clothing company. Oh, I remember now, Eric said with a look of realization. He quickly remembered the scene when he first met Chris and Emily at Jeffrey's house on Thanksgiving Day 2 years ago. At that time, Chris was still working at Morgan Stanley. He was in charge of the listing of Emily's family's clothing company. Because Emily's father falsely reported the company's information, the listing failed. I remember telling you last year that if I could make money in the futures market, I would invest in your family's clothing company. I'm sorry, I almost forgot about this. How much money do you need now? Emily didn't expect Eric to be so straightforward. She glanced at her boyfriend and carefully raised a finger. 100 million? Chris immediately turned his head and stared at her. Emily quickly changed her words. Actually, 60 million is fine too. Eric knew that Chris was too serious and old-fashioned. Although he had a large amount of funds from Firefly, he felt that it would be unprofessional to pull in investments for his girlfriend's family business. That was why he had that awkward look on his face. After acquiring Disney, Eric still had about $1.5 billion left from the $8 billion that he had extracted from the Gulf War last year. After completing the acquisition of Disney, Firefly Pictures could also become self-sufficient. Therefore, he had originally planned to use the money for other investments. How about this? Eric thought for a while and said with a smile, I'll be in New York for the next few days. You can find some time to prepare a document for me. After I look at it, I'll decide whether to invest 60 million or 100 million. Is that okay? Of course, Emily said with a hint of excitement on her face. She almost wanted to get up immediately and take out the document that she had prepared long ago. However, she quickly realized that this was not the right place to do so. After dinner, Eric rejected Chris and Emily's suggestion to stay the night. Chris walked Eric downstairs and the two walked side by side on the bustling streets of Comic Town. I've always thought that I'm very lucky. If I didn't happen to meet Jeffrey and you, I might not be where I am now. I have no family in this world. I've always treated Jeffrey as an elder. Eric looked at the neon signs on the roadside and sighed. He still remembered that a few years ago, he wanted to make Home Alone on a whim. If he didn't happen to meet Jeffrey and his film team, he, a rookie in Hollywood, might not have been able to perfectly make the movie in his memory even if he could pull up a team. Chris knew why Eric suddenly mentioned this. Chris didn't feel that he and his father were Eric's benefactors. He had always been very self-aware. Similarly, if he didn't meet Eric, he didn't know if his father would be able to pull himself together again. He didn't even know how long the Cold War between him and his father would last. Not to mention now, he was managing more than $2 billion in assets. If he didn't choose to resign and continued to work at Morgan Stanley, it would take at least 10 years for him to be able to operate an investment project of the same scale alone. Actually, we're all very lucky. Eric smiled and said, "Yeah." Chris put his hands in the pockets of his windbreaker and said, "By the way, you don't have to worry about this investment. Emily's father has retired. She's now in charge of the clothing company. It's been developing well in the past 2 years. If it weren't for the incident 2 years ago, the company would have easily gone public again. Then you and Emily can discuss the specific investment amount. For example, when you go back later," Eric joked. "I'll leave it to you. I'll try not to interfere." Chris smiled and said, "By the way, when you came back today, you said that you already have some ideas about the computer network? I didn't expect you to remember this. Okay, stop teasing me. What ideas do you have? Tell me." Eric looked around and pointed to a roadside cafe. "If you're not in a hurry to go back, let's go in and talk for a while. The villa I bought is just in front, but it's a little cold inside. Before I came today, I asked the housekeeping company to clean it up." Chris nodded and the two of them walked side by side into a roadside cafe. They ordered 2 cups of coffee and sat down by the window. Eric organized his thoughts and said, "It's a pity that there's no laptop here. Otherwise, it would be more convenient to talk about it. You should have done some research on computers recently, right?" "Well, just say it directly. I should be able to understand," Chris said. "Actually, all my ideas are based on the widespread popularization of the computer network technology. However, as I said before, I personally think that this is the trend of the era. The possibility is very high. Moreover, even if I lose the bet, I won't lose too much." Chris agreed and said, "Actually, I feel that your judgment is very reasonable now. A few days ago, I found Emily using an Apple laptop to look at fashion designs. Those designs were all designed using software. This was unimaginable a few years ago. Moreover, the price of personal computers is not too expensive now. An ordinary person can buy one with 1 or 2 months' salary. If the computer hardware can maintain rapid growth, the popularity of personal computers will happen sooner or later. Well, let's go back to the computer network. I currently have a total of 3 ideas." Eric paused and added, "These are the ideas I came up with in the process of using the computer daily. Moreover, I plan to split these 3 ideas into 3 companies. First, it's an idea about a graphical interface browser." "Graphical interface browser?" Chris repeated Eric's words. "It's a kind of graphical version of browsing tools." Eric thought for a while and explained, "You'll understand if you compare it this way. The tools we use now are similar to the DOS operating system a few years ago. They require complicated instructions to run, and it's very inconvenient. The graphical interface browser I envision is to present the current tools with a simple graphical interface, just like Microsoft's Windows operating system. You know, before the Windows operating system appeared, people who used personal computers were often more professional. After the Windows operating system appeared, even ordinary people could use personal computers. The graphical interface browser I envision is a Windows tool that allows ordinary people to easily browse the computer network." Chapter 465. It was the introduction of Microsoft's Windows operating system that greatly accelerated the promotion of personal computers from professional technicians to ordinary people. The current computer network browsing tools were like the DOS system. They required a lot of professional knowledge to operate. This was also the reason why the computer network had not developed much despite the popularity of personal computers. Chris could imagine that if Eric's idea could be realized, it would definitely cause a revolution in the computer network. Just the first idea was enough to make Chris's eyes light up. He couldn't wait to ask, "What's the second idea?" Eric took a sip of coffee and said, "The second idea is an online email service. That's already available. I just learned it recently, but I don't think it's anything special. It's not very convenient. I'm talking about an online email service. Eric emphasized the word online and said, most of the current email transmission is done point-to-point using software. It's transmitted from one computer to another, and it's often used in a very small local area network. So if you leave the office, you can't read the email anymore. What I want to do is a company that provides online email services. It uses an independent website and server as an email carrier. This way, as long as the user can apply for an account, no matter where they are, as long as they can connect to the internet, they can read the emails sent by their friends or colleagues from anywhere. Chris said, I don't think too many people will spend money to apply for such an email account. The cost of making a call is not too high now. There are public telephones everywhere. If there's anything, they can say it over the phone. Also, people don't necessarily send emails every day. Hearing Chris's words, Eric even felt a little emotional. When he proposed this idea, Chris immediately thought of spending money to buy such a service. He didn't expect it to be free. Eric was too lazy to complain. He quickly said, I didn't intend to charge from the beginning. This will be a free online service. The first step is to accumulate users. If the computer network can be popularized, then the users of our email service will also expand to a very large scale. You can imagine, if we have 100 million active email users, how many dollars will the advertisers pay to let us send advertising emails to these users? Chris seemed to have really calculated for a while. Then, with a numb and admiring expression, he smiled and said, All right, what about the third one? Portal web, Eric said. He dipped his finger in some water and spelled out 2 words on the table. Although the internet was still in its infancy, all kinds of websites had already appeared. Take the movie industry, for example. The most famous movie website in phone use previous life, IMDb, was established in 1990. It was already quite big now. Therefore, it was not too early to launch a portal now. Even if it was too early, phone you could just burn a few million USD every month and wait for the golden age of the internet to arrive. The annual expenditure was equivalent to a small budget movie. It was not worth mentioning to Eric. Chris could roughly guess the meaning of the first 2 ideas when he heard the names. However, portal web was definitely a very unfamiliar concept to him. Eric did not know how to translate the term portal in his previous life. He could only use the most superficial term, portal. It's basically categorizing the messy websites on the internet and creating a web directory. Users can easily find the information they want from the directory. Chris nodded to show that he understood a little. However, compared to the first 2 ideas, Chris felt that Eric's idea did not have much commercial value. Although it was very practical to categorize websites, it was also very easy to imitate. It would probably be very difficult to monopolize it. Eric could also see that Chris was probably using his last idea as a bonus for the first 2 projects. However, he was not in a hurry to explain. He wanted to let the truth give Chris a surprise. In his previous life, Yahoo's market value was dozens of times more than the browser companies and online email service companies of the same era. The 2 of them chatted in the roadside cafe until late at night. Although it was already 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning according to the Western time that Eric was more accustomed to, he did not feel tired at all. His young body and ample exercise allowed Eric to maintain a high level of personal energy. It was not a problem for him to stay up for a few nights occasionally. It wasn't until 2 o'clock in the morning that Chris and Eric finally got up and left under the resentful gaze of the coffee shop's waitress. The streets of Manhattan were even colder in the middle of the night, but it didn't affect their mood at all. Find some time to write down the plan in the next few days. When the AOL thing is settled, I will prepare the 3 companies as soon as possible. By the way, since you already came up with these ideas, have you thought of a name? Chris asked when they parted ways. Eric gave a slightly mischievous smile. Of course, the 3 companies will be called Internet Explorer, Hotmail, and Yahoo. In the next few days, Eric and Chris continued to negotiate with Steve Case of AOL about the terms of cooperation. During this time, the 64th Oscars were held at the Los Angeles Music Center on March 30th. Dances with Wolves, which was nominated for 12 Oscars this year, unsurprisingly won 7 awards, including Best Picture, Best Director, and Best Actor. Because of the good news of winning the Oscars, the box office of Dances with Wolves rebounded sharply again. In the 15th week of its release, the movie grossed more than $11 million in less than 1,500 theaters, and the total box office exceeded $150 million. The movie, which even Eric was not optimistic about its commercial prospects, surprised everyone with its box office results. Although only the movie's theatrical distribution rights were available, based on the box office performance of Dances with Wolves in North America and overseas, the movie was expected to gross more than $500 million worldwide. According to the original contract, Fox would receive nearly $100 million of profit from this money. For Fox, this huge sum of money, which was equivalent to half of last year's movie profits, was almost the same as picking it up from the ground. Many insiders who knew the inside story even mocked Murdoch at some parties for having a good daughter. In addition, because Eric had brought The Silence of the Lambs forward by a year, there was no competition from Jodie Foster. Susan Sarandon also won the Best Actress award with TG's Flowers at the End of the Road. At the same time, Flowers at the End of the Road also won the Best Original Screenplay award. The double commercial and artistic success of Flowers at the End of the Road made more people notice TG, a film company composed of 3 women. Although they knew that the backers behind TG were the 2 giants, Firefly and Fox, there were still many investors who frequently contacted the 3 women, trying to buy shares or invest in them. Even if an independent film company occasionally achieved good results, because the 7 major distributors who monopolized the distribution channels defaulted on their share of profits, these film companies had to seek external financing in order to shoot new movies. However, for TG, this problem didn't exist at all. Whether TG's movies were distributed by Fox or Firefly, they would receive their share of profits on time. Moreover, even if they were still short of funds, both Eric and Murdoch were very willing to invest. So those investors who tried to buy shares in TG all returned with disappointment. In New York, because both parties were eager to cooperate, Firefly successfully reached a preliminary agreement with AOL. However, the specific investment amount would be negotiated in detail by Chris Team and Steve Cass. At the same time, Eric also confirmed the plan to invest $80 million in Emily Brighton's clothing company. This number was discussed by Eric, Chris, and Emily together. A week later, Eric left 3 project plans with Chris and rushed back to Los Angeles. The preparation for Mr. and Mrs. Smith was very smooth. Because it was her first movie in Hollywood, Wu Beige was very serious and personally participated in every detail. The movie's setting, scene design, and the selection of supporting roles were all carried out in an orderly manner. It was estimated that in late April, when the 2 protagonists, Nicole and Pierce Brosnan, finished their firearms training at the Secret Service school, the movie would be able to smoothly start shooting. Because he didn't have to worry too much about Mr. and Mrs. Smith, Eric put most of his energy into the preparation of Jurassic Park. The most important part of Jurassic Park was the design of the dinosaurs. According to the paleontologist's restoration of the dinosaur fossils, in fact, whether it was the Tyrannosaurus rex or the Velociraptor, the original image was very different from the image in his memory. Eric combined the memories in his mind and conducted many discussions with several paleontologists to determine the image of the most important dinosaurs. As for the special effects of Jurassic Park, Eric didn't care about the cost of technical research and development. If Jurassic Park was completely made with CG special effects, there wouldn't be much of a technical problem. However, it would take a lot of time. After all, no one had ever used CG to make a very realistic dinosaur monster. Starting from scratch, it would take a lot of time and energy to explore the technology. In addition, Stan Winston was an expert in model special effects. After thinking about the pros and cons, Eric quickly decided to follow Spielberg's method in his previous life and use a combination of model and CG special effects. After this decision was made, a large number of model special effects designers in the huge studio in Praia Vista began to work on the dinosaur model. The dinosaur model that needed to be used couldn't be solved by a simple empty shell. In addition to the realistic appearance and skin, the interior of the dinosaur also required complex mechanical transmission devices. However, compared to CG special effects, the dinosaur model made in this way was very cost-effective. In any case, the model would be more realistic than CG special effects at the current stage. The busy work passed day by day. In the process of preparing for Jurassic Park, the collaboration between Disney and Columbia, Mr. and Mrs. Smith, officially started shooting in Los Angeles in mid-April. At the same time, Firefly's other summer movie, Genius in Disguise, produced by TG and starring Jim Carrey and Claudia Schiffer, was also completed smoothly. Digital Domain quickly took over the special effects work for Genius in Disguise. It was less than 2 months before the summer break. Firefly and Disney also began to do more intensive promotional work for the summer break. Of course, several other major film companies naturally joined in the marketing war. At the same time, when Mr. and Mrs. Smith started shooting, another secret condition that the two Helmers of Columbia promised Firefly when they first cooperated with Columbia began to be implemented. In fact, the operation of this matter wasn't too complicated. After a few secret discussions, Peter Guber and Eric decided on a specific plan. In April, in an inconspicuous professional Hollywood magazine, Columbia announced to the outside world that in order to reduce operating costs, Columbia would lay off 2,000 people within half a year, and some less important departments would also be abolished. The outside world did not have much of a reaction to Columbia's layoffs. After all, Columbia Pictures' performance in the past 2 years was not very good, and it caused more than 2 consecutive years of losses. The layoffs seemed very justified. If the Japanese were not bound by the original promise that they could not interfere with Columbia's operations, they might have already taken measures to reduce costs. However, although most people did not know the truth, how could such a large-scale move not attract the attention of Hollywood insiders? When Columbia announced the news in the first week, they directly closed the branches in several countries in Latin America, Brazil, Argentina, and Colombia. Many people realized something was wrong. It must be known that although Latin America was generally hostile to the United States, although it was very close to the United States geographically, it was dozens of times more difficult for Hollywood films to enter the Latin American market than to enter the European market. But even so, it was too much to completely eliminate these branches. After all, although Latin America was closed, it was still a super large market with more than 1 billion people. Its future potential was limitless. Just like Eastern Europe, after the upheaval in Eastern Europe, the Eastern European market, which was originally very resistant to Hollywood films, was instantly opened. The film companies that originally had a foundation in Eastern Europe could obtain more advantages than other film companies. The situation in Latin America was obviously the same. You're tuning in to the Earbook Haven YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.